Chapter 265. Dean retracted his eyes and followed the jailer. The things in the lake on both sides of the stone path felt the movement and gathered on both sides of the stone path. From time to time, huge waves surged out from the lake. Dean's expression was as usual as he came to the gate of the prison. The guard said a few words to the guard and handed out the letter given by Dean. The guard looked at the letter and opened the door. He looked at Dean indifferently and didn't say a word. "Please," the jailer said to Dean and led the way. The hall behind the door was as lively as a pub. Many jailers were sitting in the hall, drinking tea and chatting. Most of the topics revolved around prisoners and women. Several jailers who were sitting outside the hall noticed Dean. Their eyes flashed with excitement. But when they saw that Dean's hands and feet were not shackled, their excitement turned into surprise. One of the jailers blinked. He felt that the clean and gentlemanly teenager was familiar, but he couldn't remember where he had seen him before. "Crazy ol', someone has come to bail someone out." The jailer who was leading the way shouted to the counter behind the hall. The middle-aged jailer who was playing cards with several jailers behind the counter heard the shout. He looked up, and the others who were playing cards also looked over. One of them was surprised when he saw Dean. This kid, Black Chicken, do you know him?" Another jailer asked. Black Chicken rubbed his eyes and looked carefully. He suddenly shouted, "Isn't this the kid who escaped from our prison?" The jailers were stunned when they heard his words. They carefully looked at Dean and suddenly burst into an uproar. "No wonder I felt a bit familiar. It's him on the wanted poster. F***CK. This kid actually dared to come back. He went out for a walk and dressed like a dog. I almost didn't recognize him." The middle-aged crazy old looked at Dean for a moment. He put the cards in his hand into the back pocket of his trousers. He got up and walked towards Dean. He looked down at the teenager in front of him and said, "Kid, your surname is Dew, right?" Dean bowed his head and smiled. Suddenly, he kicked the middle-aged man's knee. The knee was one of the hardest bones in the human body, but at this moment, the middle-aged man's knee was bent backward. At the same time, the middle-aged man's body leaned forward and fell toward Dean. Dean lifted his right hand to support his falling body. "Welcome back. You don't have to be so courteous." As soon as he finished his words, his palm subtly moved down. The middle-aged man didn't have time to stand firm, and suddenly fell down. Dean also moved sideways to avoid the fall. He quietly looked at the middle-aged man who fell at his feet, as if he was looking at an ant. The sudden change shocked the jailers. They didn't expect that Dean would dare to beat the jailers in the prison. Moreover, the middle-aged man was not an ordinary jailer. He was the supervisor of the first floor of the prison. He belonged to a small level in the entire prison. "Stop, brat. Do you want to break the law?" All the jailers stood up from their chairs and shouted at Dean. Dean slowly looked up and glanced at the crowd. "It seems that your food is not good. Are you so hungry that you can't even stand firm? Bastard, it's your sneak attack. Attack the jailer. You are dead. Inform the knight of the magistrate that someone has broken into the prison." One of the jailers turned around and ran out from the side door. Apparently, he was going to inform the guards. Dean smiled and walked toward a nearby table. The three jailers who were standing at the table and glaring at Dean saw him coming over. Their faces changed, and they hurriedly retreated. Their movements were too big, and their feet tripped over the chair. Dean didn't look at the three of them. He bent down and grabbed the chair that was overturned on the ground. He patted the dust on it and sat down. After a moment, the sound of iron boots echoed. The door that had just been closed was pushed open again. A jailer with more than a dozen knights of the magistrate rushed in. They quickly found Dean sitting on the chair. The jailer immediately said, "It's him. He attacked the jailers. Prepare to break into the prison." The team of knights of the magistrate looked at Dean and the middle-aged man who had climbed up from the ground. Their faces changed. The young captain pulled out his sword from his waist. The other team members got the order and also pulled out their swords. More than a dozen shining swords were held high in the hall. They were pointing at Dean, who was sitting on the chair. Dean smiled. "Are you sure you want to listen to one side of the story and arrest me?" The young captain's face was cold. Did he hurt his leg by himself? Dean shrugged. "Maybe it's true." "Nonsense." The young captain shouted. "You attacked the jailer. I advise you to surrender." If you resist, then your crime will increase. Dean smiled. You said that I heard him. You didn't see it with your own eyes. You didn't ask him. How can you directly convict me? The young captain's face was cold as he looked at the middle-aged man next to him. Crazy old man. Did he hurt you? It's him. It's him. The middle-aged crazy old man held the table next to him and moved towards the young captain. He pointed at Dean and roared. It's this kid. He attacked me. Damn it. Kill him. The young captain stared at Dean coldly. Now what do you have to say? Dean shrugged. Nothing to say. Well, cuff him. The young captain waved his hand. I have something to say. Suddenly, a gentle and dignified voice sounded from the back of the hall. An old man dressed like a butler came down the stairs. When the prison guards saw the old man, they were shocked and hurriedly bowed their heads and said, Greetings, butler. Peter ignored the guards on both sides and went straight to Dean. He looked at the middle-aged man next to the young captain. How can you falsely accuse Mr. Dean of breaking your leg? The middle-aged man was stunned. The guards were stunned and looked at each other in blank dismay. The young captain was startled and couldn't help but frown. Peter glanced at the crazy middle-aged man with a hint of warning. He turned to the young man and said, It's just a misunderstanding. You all can leave now. Mr. Dew is here to bail someone out. How can he break the prison? The young captain looked at Dean, who was sitting next to him, and then looked at the old man. He was silent for a moment and bowed. Yes. Then he put his sword back into the scabbard and turned away. After the young man left, Crazy Ole suddenly felt that the temperature around his body had decreased a lot, and the air had become a little cold. He could not help but say to Peter, Butler, it was this kid just now, huh? Peter glanced at him. The old captain's face slightly changed, and he immediately shut up. Peter turned to look at Dean. There was a gentle smile on his face. Mr. Dean, you are now an architect of the Temple of Elements. Every move you make represents the will of the God of Light. Why bother with these small characters? Dean indifferently smiled. I can't rub sand in my eyes. Peter's eyes lit up. Mr. Dean, the person you want to bail is inside. Shall I show you the way? Don't bother. Dean stood up and dusted. I'm familiar with the road here. He went towards the side door of the hall. There was an iron lock on the door. He gently pulled it and the lock broke. He gently pushed the door open and went inside. The guards' faces changed as they saw Dean break the lock of the door so easily. They looked at Peter in awe as Dean's figure disappeared from their sight. Crazy Ole's face changed as he gritted his teeth. Butler, I'm also a member of the prison. It doesn't matter if I'm injured, but the one who will lose face is... Peter coldly snorted and said, You know that you represent the prison and be smarter. Don't cause trouble for the prison. If you really catch him, he will probably be released on the same day before his, but warms up. At that time, he'll have the right to sue you for slandering and framing him. At that time, the one who'll be locked up will be you. Do you think your power is greater or his? Crazy Ole was startled. Butler, this kid, you pieces of trash, use the time you have to play cards to read more newspapers and wipe your feces-clogged brains. Peter's eyes were cold. He didn't look like a housekeeper at all. After he finished speaking, he turned around and left, going upstairs along the stairs behind the hall. The frozen atmosphere in the hall gradually melted after Peter left. Everyone looked at each other. Suddenly, one of the short guards exclaimed, I remember. Isn't that kid called Dean? The news about him has been in the newspaper every day. He is an architect from the Temple of Elements. He has won the Epic Medal. Oh my God, what? Everyone was shocked as they heard the short guard's words. Crazy Ole was stunned. He didn't like to read the newspaper. Although he had occasionally heard about it from other guards, he didn't associate the two names together. One was a hunter who had committed a crime and was imprisoned in the prison. The other was an architect from the Temple of Elements. The difference was like the difference between the sun and the night. How could they be the same person? Thinking of Butler Peter's words, he suddenly broke out in a cold sweat. His heart was so cold that he even forgot the pain in his feet. He secretly rejoiced and felt a lingering fear. If he had really arrested such a person, he reckoned that he would really end up like Butler Peter said, being sued and thrown into prison. Chapter 266. Dean went down the wooden stairs and saw the torture room. A young jailer was sitting behind the counter next to the stairs. He was reading a book with withered pages. Dean was separated by 6 or 7 meters, but he could clearly see the words on the book. It was a book about love between men and women. The language was explicit and obscene. Dean frowned slightly. The young jailer heard the footsteps and put his hand on the book to cover his eyes. He thought that it was his colleague who had come down to play, but he saw a strange teenager. He was surprised for a moment. He saw that Dean was from outside the prison. His eyes flashed with excitement. He folded the book and stuffed it into the drawer. He got up and grabbed a snake whip from the counter. He looked at Dean and found that there were no handcuffs on Dean's body. Moreover, there were no knights escorting him. "Who are you?" The young jailer slightly frowned but didn't rush to start. Dean glanced at him. "I'm here to bail someone out." "Bail someone out?" The young jailer suddenly thought of today's notice. He didn't expect that the person who had the ability to bail out a criminal would turn out to be such a teenager. But maybe the other party was just an errand boy. He put away the whip and took out the key from his waist. "Come with me." He went down the stairs and opened the heavy iron gate of the first floor of the prison. Dean entered and saw that the layout was still the same. The familiar corridor, dim light, and steel cages, as well as the stench of urine and human dirt in the air. At a glance, he saw many familiar faces. "Number 23, someone has come to bail you out." The young jailer came to the long corridor, and the baton in his hand clanked against the prison cages until it stopped in front of a dark cage, and he shouted inside. The entire prison fell into a brief silence as the young jailer's words fell. The next moment, an uproar broke out. "Bail! It's bail again. I've seen it twice this year. Can I be bailed out after entering here? Please, elder, bail me out too. I'm willing to dedicate all my loyalty to you. Sir, please bail me out too." While everyone was in shock, some of the prisoners in the cages closer to the iron gate had noticed Dean. They immediately stretched out their hands to him for help. They poured all their feelings into pleading. Dean quietly watched as he walked to the front of the cell where the young jailer was standing. He saw a shocked blonde youth sitting inside. There were 4 prisoners next to him. They didn't expect that their boss would be bailed out. "Gene, don't you recognize me?" Dean smiled. The blonde youth in the cage looked at the figure that blocked the light. He tried to search his mind for the people he knew in the past, but there was no such face. He was surprised. Do you know me?" Dean smiled. "It hasn't been long since I escaped from here. Have you forgotten about me so soon?" Prison break. The blonde youth's pupils shrank as he heard Dean's words. "You are Dean?" Dean was Dean's code name in prison. Hearing the words of the blonde young man, the people in the other cages who were constantly reaching out their hands to beg suddenly became silent. They looked at the tall, handsome young man in astonishment. This was Du Ho, who had escaped from the prison previously. The young jailer was stunned as he looked at the youth. He had heard about the only person who had escaped from Thornflower Prison in the last 50 years. But he wasn't assigned to supervise the prisoners, so he didn't recognize Dean. He didn't expect that the legendary figure would be standing in front of him. He dared to come back after escaping from here? Why would he bail out the people who were in prison together with him? The young jailer was stunned on the spot. Dean smiled. "Is there anyone else who has crossed the prison after me?" The blonde youth had seen Dean's appearance through the faint light from the top of the wall. Although there were differences, but the eyes and lips were exactly the same, especially the tone of voice and smile. He laughed as he grabbed the bars of the cage. "Of course not. You are the most ruthless person I have ever seen in my life." The people in the other cages also reacted and became agitated. "Du, you're back. Bail us out." "Du, we're all acquaintances. Bail me out too." All the cages were begging for mercy. Dean slightly raised his hand. Everyone was looking at him. They didn't dare to provoke him. "I'm only here to bail out 5 people." Dean calmly said, "It's not easy to bail you out. I need to ask the nobles to come forward and pay about 50,000 gold coins." 50,000 gold coins? The people in the cages were shocked. Except for a few individuals, most of them had never seen tens of thousands of gold coins in their lives. Like the middle-aged man nicknamed Fat Pig in the first cage. He used to be a rich businessman, but at most he had assets of 10 or 20,000 gold coins. 50,000 gold coins was an astronomical figure for them. Please do a good deed. Some of them reacted and immediately begged Dean. Although they knew that the amount of 50,000 gold coins was not easy to come up with, and Dean was not related to them, the possibility of him taking out 50,000 gold coins for them was very low, but at the moment they could only continue to beg to win a glimmer of hope. Dean slightly raised his hand to interrupt the crowd. Everyone, the number of people who will be bailed out has been decided. If we raise the money in the future, we will naturally bail you out. As for who will be bailed out first, we will talk about it later. Everyone looked at each other and didn't dare to speak anymore. The young jailer's eyelids twitched. He felt that his heart was bleeding for using 50,000 gold coins to bail out these garbage. Dean glanced at him and signaled with his eyes. The young guard understood the meaning of Dudian's words. He quickly took out the key to open the cage. He looked at the blonde youth. Come out. Lord Dean has come to bail you out. He is really loyal. Then he looked at Dudian in a flattering way. The blonde youth had just stepped out of the cage when he heard the jailer's words. He couldn't help but look at the youth in front of him. Looking at the faint smile on the youth's face under the light, he suddenly felt as if his chest was blocked by something. He pinched his nose hard, clenched his fist, and heavily pounded his chest where his heart was. He took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "You let me regain my freedom. I know that you bailed me out not because of our past relationship, but because you need me. Don't worry, I will devote the rest of my life to you." Dudian didn't care. "I believe you." The blonde youth lowered his head. His shoulders trembled. Dean turned and walked towards the corridor. The blonde youth immediately followed him. The young jailer quickly locked the cage again and quickly caught up with Dean. He smiled. "The second one is number 36. He is here." He trotted to the front of the cage and said to the person inside, "Number 36, get up. Someone has bailed you out." There was a burly youth standing in the dark cage. He had already stood up from the straw mat. He had a complex look on his face as he looked at the youth who was walking freely outside the cage. His body shook as he heard the young jailer's words. He felt a rush of blood from the soles of his feet to his brain. Although he wanted to open his mouth to beg, he didn't. He didn't expect to hear that he was one of the 5 people who had been bailed out. Chapter 267. Scar. Jean was pleasantly surprised as he looked at the burly youth in the cage. They were one of the few friends in the prison. He didn't expect to be bailed out by Dean at the same time. Dean came to the front of the cage and looked at the burly man who used to live in the next cage. Old Scar come out. "Dean." Scar looked at him with a complex expression. The sudden surprise caught him off guard. It was as if he was in a dream. He quickly came out of the cage and said to Dean, "Thank you." Dean smiled. "It won't be easy to get out of here. You have to be mentally prepared." Scar's expression turned serious. "I'm willing to do anything as long as I can get out of this damn place." Dean nodded. "You will bleed, but never cry if you follow me." Scar deeply stared at him. "I believe in you." Dean smiled. "Let's go and find our other 3 partners. They are in the prison below." Below? Jean and Scar were startled. At this time, the people in the surrounding cages were in a commotion as they heard Dean's words. "Dean, don't go. Dean, take me with you. I beg you. Bail me out. I'll do whatever you want me to do." "Dean." Dean's footsteps slightly paused as he heard the voices of the crowd. He suddenly thought of something. He looked at Scar. A few months ago, wasn't there a young man who claimed to be from the Milan family? A few months ago? Scar thought for a moment and nodded. There is such a person. He shouted as soon as he came in. He seemed to have mentioned the word Milan. It didn't take long for this person to be released on bail. He even implicated Pig, who lived in the same prison. He was skinned and executed. Pig blamed himself for being too hungry. He didn't investigate clearly before acting recklessly. "Dean, is this person your friend?" Dean's eyes lit up. "He is an enemy." Scar and Jean looked at each other. Jean immediately said, "If we knew that he was your enemy, we would have let Pig kill him. Even if his family came to bail him out, they would only be able to bail out a corpse. It's all in the past. There will still be opportunities in the future." Dean waved his hand and looked at the 2 rows of cages. As I said before, all of you want to be bailed out. But the quota is limited and there is an order. How should he choose? I will filter through everyone's resume and performance in prison. If there's something I like, I will give it priority. So, everyone, please do your best in prison. After that, he gestured to the young prison guard to lead the way. The young jailer glanced at him with apprehension and said nothing, silently leading the way. Scar and Jean followed behind Dean. They left the corridor in the middle of the prison and went to the bottom of the prison. After a moment, Dean came to the second floor of the prison. There were 4 young jailers sitting in a small room outside the prison. They were playing cards and drinking. They stood up when they saw Dean, Scar, and Jean. One of the young jailers quickly ran to the pillar and grabbed the string of the bell. The young jailer didn't wait for him to shake the bell. He said in a hurry, "Don't be nervous. This is Mr. Dean. He came to bail out the prisoners." One of the 4 young jailers recognized the young man, leading the way, and asked in bewilderment, "Do you have proof?" The young man looked at Dean. "Mr. Dean." Dean took out the letter from his arms and handed it out. "The warden is guarding outside. Do you need to worry about me sneaking in?" The 4 young jailers quickly opened the letter and looked at it. They took back the letter and handed it back to Dean. "All right, come with me. Remember not to talk nonsense." They opened the heavy iron door and led the way. "Mr. Dean, you should follow him." The young man who led the way stopped at the door. Dean nodded and followed the brown-haired youth. It was a long and dark passage. It was more than 10 meters long. There was a huge round iron door at the end of the passage. There were 2 knights of the magistrate in front of the door. Dean glanced at the prison. Although the Thornflower prison belonged to the military, but it seemed to have a cooperative relationship with the magistrate. "Open the door," the brown-haired jailer said. The 2 knights of the magistrate looked at Dean, Jean, and Scar. They slightly frowned but didn't say anything. They opened the door. As the round iron door was opened, loud cheers came out from inside. Wild laughter spread into the passage. What were these madmen doing? The brown-haired jailer's face sank. He pulled out the baton from his waist and went in. Dean, Jean, and Scar were curious. They had been here for several years, but had never been to the second layer of the prison. They had heard from the old people on the first layer that there were some vicious people. They followed the brown-haired jailer to the gate. The structure of the prison was different from the first layer. It wasn't a straight corridor, but a circular hall. There were cages around the walls. Each cage was separated by a few meters from each other. There was only 1 person in each cage. At the moment, wild laughter and cheers came out from the cages. At the same time, there were 2 cages in the 10 o'clock direction. From time to time, there were bang sounds mixed with laughter. Duddian stared and saw that there were 2 people in the shadows of the cages. One of them was tall and sturdy, nearly 2 meters in height. The other one was thin and had very long hair that was draped over his body like a woman. At the moment, the source of the bang sounds was that the 2 prisoners were hitting their heads against the iron pillars in front of them. Old Jean and Scar were stunned by the scene. Dean's eyes lit up as he looked at the other cages. The brown-haired jailer roared as he saw the 2 prisoners hitting their cages. "2 bastards. Do you want to die? Stop. Yo-yo. Look, this idiot brought 3 newbies over. Ha ha ha." There was a burst of laughter as they pointed at Dean and the other 2. The brown-haired jailer's baton hit the cage. The sound of metal covered the sound of the 2 heads hitting each other. He waved the baton and hit the cage in front of them. He roared, "Stop. Stop. If you don't stop, I will give you 3 needles." The 2 prisoners who were still hitting their heads stopped when they heard the word 3 needles. They looked at each other. The burly man's head was full of blood, but he didn't care. He grinned. "Little devil, I have 137 needles. You lose." "Humph." The man's hair was very long. He looked like a woman. He snorted and spoke in a very neutral male voice. "If this fool didn't stop us, we would have continued. Let's see who will laugh in the end." "A loss is a loss, ha ha." The burly man laughed. The brown-haired youth's face turned ugly. He ignored the 2 and turned back to Dean and the other 2. "Which number do you want to bail?" Dean pointed to the deepest 12 o'clock direction. "Number 7. The brown-haired youth was startled. His face changed as he whispered, Show me the document. Dean smiled as he saw the fear in the youth's face. He handed the document to him again. Don't worry, I'm here. He won't hurt you. The brown-haired youth was embarrassed. He quickly glanced at the document to confirm the prisoner number. His face turned gloomy. Come with me. He took Dean to the 12 o'clock direction. The laughter and discussion quieted down. Someone shouted, Bail? Did I just hear bail? It's bail. Number 7 is bail. Chapter 268. Dean didn't pay attention to the noise around him. He came to the deepest part of the cage. He saw a skinny old man leaning against the wall. His linen clothes were very clean. The old man didn't participate in the previous laughter and cheers. It was as if he was isolated from the world. He just quietly leaned against the wall. Duddian knew that he had been observing him from the moment he entered the room. Number 7, someone has come to bail you out. The brown-haired youth stopped 2 meters away from the cage. The old man didn't pay attention to him as he indifferently looked at Dean. Do you know me? Dean smiled. Nice to meet you. My name is Dean. I'll be frank with you. The purpose of bailing you out is that I want you to work for me. I appreciate your management ability and the degree of blackness in your heart. The old man slightly raised his eyebrows. If you have investigated my resume, then you should know that none of my masters have a good end. Duddian smiled. Because they're just mortals. Oh, the old man sneered. Little guy, you seem to be very confident. Dean smiled and looked into his eyes. At least I have the confidence to suppress you. Is that so? The old man slowly stood up and dusted his body. Can you sleep well if you want to use me? Dean whispered. Don't doubt the people you use. I'll bail you out, so I will trust you. I hope you won't let me down. That's a good sentence. The old man looked him up and down and said, You don't look old, but you're quite bold. To be able to come here to bail me out, you must have a lot of power behind you. If you can leave this place, I naturally have no objections. If you want me to be loyal to you, that's fine, but whether you can trust me or not, I can't control that. Dean smiled. Come out. The old man stared at him, suddenly smiled and said, Before I come out, I have something to deal with. After he finished speaking, he tilted his head to look at the brown-haired young man beside him and said softly, I said that when I come out, I won't let any of you go. The brown-haired youth's expression suddenly changed, and he angrily said, How dare you? My hands have been stained with more blood than yours. Do you think I dare? The old man sneered. The brown-haired youth's forehead overflowed with cold sweat. He took 2 steps back and said to Dean, This man is a madman. You should change the bail. Dean patted his shoulder and looked at the old man. You are a smart person. You should know the smart approach. The old man glanced at him, and the killing intent in his eyes receded slightly. He nodded slightly and said, All right, open the door. Duddian told the brown-haired youth. The brown-haired youth's face turned pale. He looked at the old man and finally braced himself to step forward and open the cage. The old man smiled indifferently and pushed the door open. He looked at the brown-haired youth and whispered, Take care. The brown-haired youth's face turned ugly. He gritted his teeth and said, You madman, if you dare to break the law again, it won't be so easy next time. The old man smiled and didn't care. He came in front of Dean, and his eyes fell on Dean's left hand that was hanging on his neck. He said, Is your arm injured? At such a young age, you have provoked an enemy. It's quite troublesome. Dean looked at him, but didn't say anything. He looked at the brown-haired youth and said, Take me to the bottom floor. The brown-haired youth gritted his teeth, turned around, and closed the cage. He led the way in front. The old man saw that Dean didn't pay attention to him, so he raised his eyebrows. He waited for Dean to turn around, and then revealed a sneer. He glanced at Scar and Jean, who were behind Dean. Did you bail out 2 little guys from the first floor? If we have the resources to bail them out, we might as well bail out another one here. Although they're all brainless people, at least they can be of some help. Scar and Jin's face changed. Scar looked back at the old man and said, Old man, what do you mean? The old man stood still and looked at Scar's face. Is the IQ of the little guys in the first floor so low that you need to translate? Scar clenched his fists. If you weren't bailed out by Dean, then you would be a dead man the moment you said the first sentence. Is that so? The old man smiled. That's what I wanted to say. Dean stopped and looked back at the two. He said to the old man, Do you want to test my tolerance? The old man's face slightly changed. He put away his smile and said, It's just a suggestion. You bailed me out because you wanted to give you some advice? I believe you can distinguish between what is advising and what is giving orders. Dean glanced at him indifferently, turned around, and continued to move forward. The old man's face changed, and a trace of haze flashed in his eyes. After a moment, the crowd followed the brown-haired youth along the stairs to the bottom of the prison. They passed through several checkpoints along the way and finally reached the bottom of the prison. Dean clearly felt that the air in the bottom of the prison was much colder and the light was weak. There were only a few oil lamps shining on the corridors of the prison. The cells in the bottom of the prison were separated by concrete. Incidentally, the concrete mainly came from the wreckage of the buildings outside the giant wall. This way, please. The one leading the way was replaced by the guard at the bottom level. He was trembling as he led the way in the middle of the aisle. From this small subconscious action, Dean could feel the fear in the guard's heart. Unlike the second layer of the prison, the bottom prison was extremely quiet. Only the footsteps of the crowd echoed. He looked at the prison that they passed by. Each prison had a heavy steel cast iron gate. There were several thick steel pillars that were used to deliver food on weekdays. Suddenly, Dean saw a face behind the steel pillar. It was an extremely hideous and distorted face. There were all kinds of scars on the face. Only one eye was left. It was staring at him like an evil ghost. Dean playfully stretched out his tongue to make a grimace. Bang! Suddenly, a loud noise came from behind the steel door, shaking the wall where the steel door was fastened and causing dust to fly out. The guard who was leading the way was shocked. He quickly pulled out his baton and came back. His face was pale as he looked at the cell. He was relieved to see that the iron door was safe and sound. He fiercely said, Are you looking for a beating? The evil face behind the prison turned to look at him, but didn't speak. The guard felt uncomfortable as he was stared at by the evil face. He turned to Dean and said, Mr. Dean, please come in. Dean nodded slightly. He winked at the people in the prison before leaving. He secretly sighed in his heart. Indeed, they were senior hunters at the bottom of the prison. Their bodies had been tortured by the prison, but they were still able to burst out such a strong power. He couldn't help but look forward to the two that he had bailed out. Soon, the guard stopped in front of cell and said, Number 3, get up. Someone has come to bail you out. The sound of dragging chains echoed in the cell. After a moment, a disheveled face appeared behind the steel pillar of the iron door. There was a pair of sharp, shining eyes behind the disheveled hair. He glanced at the aisle outside. He saw Dean, Old Man, Scar, and others coming from the side. He said, Bail me out? Who is it? The voice was low and hoarse. It was unpleasant to hear. Dean said, Me, Dean. You will be loyal to me after you come out. Can you do it? You? The man looked at Dean. His eyes flashed. Well, I will. Dean smiled. It's easy for me to take other people's words seriously, so I hope you can fulfill your promise. Chapter 269. Dean looked at him and said to the jailer, Open the door. The jailer hesitated for a moment but still took out the key and opened the door. As the heavy iron door opened, everyone saw the appearance of the person. He was about 1.8 meters tall. His upper body was naked. His left and right chest muscles were covered with sword scars. There were steel nails pierced on both sides of his shoulder blades. But unlike the steel nails pierced by Dean and Old Man 7, this steel nail was like an eagle's claw. The front part of the nail was barbed in front of the chest. 2 thick chains were tied to the end of the nail and were fixed to the back wall. It was impossible to pull out the nail by oneself. Unlocked, the brawny man grinned, revealing 2 rows of incomplete yellow teeth as he arrogantly ordered the jailer. The jailer's face was full of fear. He took out a key and carefully entered the cell. He went to the back of the burly man and unlocked the chains that were fastened to the steel nails on his back. With 2 bangs, 2 chains fell to the ground. The strong man licked his lips and slowly stepped out of the cell. He looked at Dean. "Little guy, let's go. I don't want to stay here any longer. But you have to stay for a while." Dean said to the jailer, "Please lead the way to number 1. The man raised his eyebrows, but his face slightly changed as he heard Du Dian's words. "Number 1? Do you want to bail out number 1? Do you have a problem with that?" Dean looked at him. The burly man was slightly stifled. He squinted his eyes and suddenly laughed, saying, "Of course not, please." Dean took back his eyes and motioned to the jailer to lead the way. The jailer locked the door of the prison and walked in front of the crowd. They turned a corner and came to a dead end. There were 2 cells. He came to the cell on the left and said, "Number 1, someone has come to bail you out. Get ready to come out." There was dead silence in the cell. There was no response. The jailer came to the side of the aisle and picked up an oil lamp. He passed it to the steel pillar of the iron door and looked inside. He was relieved to see that there was nothing unusual. He put the oil lamp back and took out the key to open the door. The cell was dark, but his vision wasn't affected. He saw that there was a cross on the wall. There were many chains and steel nails locking a slender figure. It seemed to be a woman. Her hair was extremely long and hung down her knees. Her clothes were ragged and exposed a large part of her skin. There were even traces of dried blood on her knees. Dean was slightly startled. Although he expected number 1 to be extraordinary, he didn't expect to encounter such cruel treatment. Her whole body was pierced by steel nails. She couldn't even move or lie down. No wonder the jailer dared to open the door without seeing any response from inside. As the heavy iron door opened, the jailer took the lead to enter. Dean followed behind him. Brawny man, old man, Scar, Jean, and others entered one after another. The old man took an oil lamp from the wall and illuminated the darkness of the cell. The figure nailed to the cross was revealed in front of everyone's line of sight. Everyone took a deep breath at the same time. "Number 1, number 1. The jailer came to 3 meters in front of the cross and shouted. The figure nailed to the cross slowly raised her head. A pair of dark and cold eyes shot out from the gaps of her scattered hair. Dean felt an inexplicable sense of danger. Even the senior hunter didn't give him this feeling. He was surprised, but also a bit happy. The situation was better than he expected. "Someone has come to bail you out." The jailer took half a step back and whispered. The figure on the cross raised her head. Because of her hair, no one could see her expression and eyes. After a moment of silence, she slowly said, "Unlock." The jailer hesitated. "I'll unlock the lock for you. But don't be stupid. This person has come to bail you out. If you commit another crime, no one will dare to bail you out." The woman didn't respond. Her face seemed to be looking at Dean. It was obvious that Dean was the only one who wasn't from this prison. Dean also looked at her. He could clearly see her pair of black and white eyes staring at him, full of coldness and hostility. The oil lamp couldn't illuminate the dark hair gap, so he could clearly see that her black and white eyes were staring at him. Soon, the jailer came forward and untied the chains of the steel nails on her body one by one. The steel nails were distributed to her hands, feet, shoulder blades, abdomen, and other joints. It was hard to imagine how much pain she had to endure when the steel nails were pierced. What was even more unbearable was that she had to maintain such a position for a long time. Even eating, sleeping, and excreting were like this. Scar and Jean, who were standing behind, were shocked. They thought that the most insidious and despicable means of the jailer was to pierce their shoulder blades. They didn't expect that there would be torture that was 10 times worse than that. They knew that if they were pierced like this, they would have tried to free themselves. "Hello, my name is Dean." Dean looked at her. "I know that you haven't taken your revenge. I can help you." Whoosh! The chains were untied from the cross. The woman's arms loosened as she regained her mobility. However, there were still steel nails all over her body. Her eyes were cold as she asked, "Are you from the inner wall?" Her voice was surprisingly pleasant and clear. Dean calmly replied, "Not yet, but I will be in the future." The woman looked at him coldly. She lowered her head and didn't say anything. Dean looked at her, but didn't say anything. He turned around and left the cell. After a moment, they came to the hall outside the prison. The guards in the hall returned to their original seats after Peter left. They continued to eat, drink, and play cards. But the topic of chatting shifted to Dean and the recently famous military crossbow. There were very few people who knew about military crossbows, but the jailers belonged to the military system. So they paid a lot of attention to military products. Almost everyone knew about the items that were published in the military newspaper. The guards in the hall immediately stood up as Dean and others came out. They were vigilant as they looked at Dean. Their faces changed when they saw number 7, old man, and number 1 who was walking at the end of the line. They were familiar with these people. They knew that the 3 of them had committed crimes. Now that they were out of prison, the outside world was bound to fall into darkness. Outside the prison gate, the warm sunlight shone on everyone's body. Scar and Jean took a deep breath. Their eyes were full of excitement. After so many years, they didn't expect to touch the sunlight again. This long-lost feeling was almost forgotten in their memory. The old man was silent along the way. He was extremely low-key. The strong man looked around as if he was thinking about something. Number 1 was walking at the end of the line. Her face was covered by her long hair. No one knew what she was thinking. They walked along the long aisle. The shadows and the lakes on both sides of the aisle smelled the smell of the crowd. Their reaction was more intense. Huge waves kept appearing on both sides of the aisle. They jumped high into the air. Their sharp teeth were exposed in front of everyone. They looked very strange. The strong man whistled as he saw the underwater monsters. His eyes flashed with bloodthirst. Soon, everyone arrived in front of the carriage parked by the lake. The 7th old man and the burly man looked at the flag on the carriage. The 7th old man's face showed a trace of surprise. Ryan family? Dean looked back at him and praised him without a smile. You have a good memory. The old man frowned. If I remember correctly, the Ryan family has long been in decline. They are a third-tier shareholder of the Mellon Consortium. Even if the Mellon Consortium is behind you, the Ryan family wouldn't send a carriage to you, right? Duddian indifferently said, The Mellon Consortium is our enemy. He stepped into the carriage. Because they were prepared beforehand, they specially called a large carriage. The carriage was big enough to accommodate 5 people. Scar and Jean took the lead to get on the carriage. Duddian said to them, You go to the front and accompany the coachman. Scar and Jean were startled. Scar suddenly thought of something and said in a worried tone, I'll stay. Duddian slightly shook his head. Go. The 2 saw his unquestionable expression, so they didn't stubbornly get off from the other side. They jumped to the front and squeezed on both sides of the coachman's seat. The old man saw the scene and laughed. He grabbed the door of the carriage and sat on the side of Duddian. The strong man sneered. He bent down and got into the carriage. He sat opposite to the old man. At this moment, number 1, who was sitting next to him, suddenly said, I can help you once if you tell me how to return to the inner wall. Old man number 7's face slightly changed as he heard this. He was surprised because he noticed that the ladder said return instead of enter. It meant that the ladder himself came from the inner wall. Strongman's face slightly changed as his eyes turned gloomy. Dean quietly looked at her. The only way is to listen to me if you want to go back to the inner wall. Otherwise, I'll lift your bail and you'll be wanted in the city again. Not to mention entering the inner wall, it'll be difficult for you to enter the residential area. Number 1 stared at him. I'm afraid that you won't be able to go back. Duddian sighed, but didn't say anything. Old man number 7's face relaxed as he heard number 1's words. He sneered at Duddian. Do you think that the 3 of us will let you go back? You better be obedient and confess who your backer is. Even if you don't tell us, we can find out from the coachman and the Ryan family. I'll count to 5. If you don't tell us, then you'll be responsible for the consequences. 5. Duddian looked at him. I think I should name you Old Crow in the future. I didn't expect such a deep person like you to talk so much. Old man number 7's eyes were gloomy. It seems that you don't want the chance. He looked at the strong man. I'm old. I may not be able to beat this kid. I can only rely on you. Strong man looked at him and grinned. Why should I help you? The 7th old man's expression changed slightly, and he snorted coldly. Since that's the case, let's accompany this kid back to his headquarters. At most, we'll just serve a little brat. I'm old anyway, and I don't want to go through so much trouble." Strong man sneered. "Old thing, you better pay attention to your tone when talking to me. I don't know how to respect the old and love the young." Old man number seven's face was gloomy, but he didn't answer. Strong man looked at Duddy and, "Kid, I've tolerated you in the prison. You were still in your mother's belly when I was hunting outside the giant wall. I'll give you 2 seconds to think about it. Tell me who your backer is. After we enter the fortress, immediately write a letter to the person behind you to send me the bail letter. If you dare to arrest me, I'll be the first to kill you." Duddian faintly smiled. "If that's the case, then your grandfather was just a drop of liquid when I was born. You're courting death." Strong man suddenly punched towards Dudian's cheek. The smile on Dean's face suddenly disappeared, and a cold light bloomed in his eyes. His right hand quickly stretched out, and the moment the brawny man made his move, he fiercely punched his armpit. Unexpectedly, he was the first to hit. Bang! The strong man groaned as he felt pain in his armpit. His fist suddenly lost its strength. Dean didn't stop. He grabbed the linen prison uniform and pulled the man's upper body towards him. Although he was able to stabilize his body in time, he quickly changed his grip into a fist and hit the man's face. The brawny man couldn't dodge and screamed in pain. His fingers grabbed the wooden bar on the edge of the carriage. He quickly pulled away and looked at Dean in shock. Old man number 7 was also shocked. He didn't expect such a reversal of the situation. The young boy had such skill and strength. Duddian was sitting on his chair. Although the strong man was a senior hunter, he was imprisoned in Thornflower Prison. His physical strength was exhausted. Moreover, he didn't know the details of the strong man, so he was caught off guard. If it was a head-on battle, the two would be evenly divided. If the strong man's injury was healed, then he wouldn't be the opponent of the strong man. But at that time, he would have other means to suppress the strong man. This is the first offense. Duddian indifferently looked at old man number 7 and strong man. "You have 2 more chances to try. But after the 3rd chance, I believe you will cry in front of me." Old man number 7's face turned ugly when he heard Duddian's confident words. He deeply looked at Duddian and bowed his head to look at his knees. "Are you the one who escaped from the prison?" Number 1 suddenly asked. Duddian looked at her. "Do you know?" Number 1 glanced at him, but didn't say anything and turned his head away. Old man number 7 and strong man were stunned. They looked at Duddian incredulously. They had heard about the escapee from the jailer's chat. They didn't expect that the only person who had escaped from Thornflower Prison in 50 years was sitting in front of them. Chapter 271. Duddian glanced at the old man and the strong man, Donald Nicotin, 58 years old this year. He has been in prison for 9 years. His father was a butler of an aristocratic family. He died of kidney cancer. At the age of 17, he replaced his father to manage the aristocratic family. At the age of 23, he secretly transferred the family's property. After he resigned, he sued the magistrate for detention and execution. At the age of 25, he entered the home of a wealthy businessman. In only 3 years, all the properties of the rich businessman were renamed under your name. Since then, you have changed from a servant class to a well-known wealthy businessman in the commercial district. However, your reputation is too bad. The aristocracy has always cared about reputation. They were hostile to you. In order to gild their identity, they tried to buy an aristocratic residence and join the aristocracy. However, they were sold by their son and daughter-in-law's family. They were imprisoned in Thornflower Prison for life. The old man's face slightly changed as he heard Duddian's resume. "You have investigated very carefully." Duddian glanced at him and turned to the strong man next to him, Sergey, 32 years old this year. He has been in prison for 7 years. He was a senior hunter under the Krulov Consortium. He graduated from the regular hunter college. He has a brilliant record and has created huge profits for the Krulov Consortium. During his 9 years of hunting career, he has hunted and killed 17 named monsters. He is one of the 10 rare named monsters, Steel Dragon magic marks. He was a knight and had a bright future. But because he was greedy for the beauty of the Krulov Consortium's first beauty Granita, he repeatedly offended the Krulov Consortium. He was sentenced to Thornflower Prison for 30 years for attempted rape. The strong man's eyes were gloomy as he stared at Dudian. Dudian indifferently said, I spent more than 100,000 gold coins to bail both of you out. Now that you are bailed out, I will have a bad relationship with the Krulov Consortium. I need you to make up for the price. The old man Donald Nikotin sneered. You know my resume. I can't do anything but falsify accounts. Even before I went to prison, I couldn't earn 100,000 gold coins. Now that I'm old, I don't have the ability to do so. Dudian indifferently said, You don't have to worry about this. Just listen to my orders and complete the tasks I give you. Sergei looked at number 1. What about her? She came from the inner wall. What is she doing? Dean indifferently smiled. She did what you did in prison. She's a punisher? Sergei's pupils shrank. Donald Nikotin was also slightly stunned. To him, the thing he feared the most was the Inquisition and the disciplinary officers that everyone there feared the most. He did not expect to see one sitting next to him, and it was even his cellmate. Number 1's hair swayed, his expression unreadable. Dudian slowly said, Gwyneth, 17 years old, 17. 17? Dudian didn't finish his words as Nicholas and Sergei were shocked. They were stunned as they looked at the skinny girl. They never thought that the face covered by the long hair would be a 17-years-old girl. Dudian paused for a moment. Inner Wall Magistrates Blazing Sun Medal. Specialized in hunting senior hunter-level criminals. Parent information is unknown. Birthplace is unknown. Family is unknown. Imprisoned for 3 years on the charge of killing an aristocrat. Blazing Sun level? Sergei's pupils shrank. As a senior hunter, he had always been very concerned about the disciplinary members of the magistrate. Every one of them was a terrifying existence. Even an experienced senior hunter like him wouldn't be able to escape. It was said that the Silver Moon Medal was above the Blazing Sun Medal. It was said that a disciplinary member with the Silver Moon Medal could hunt down a senior hunter. But there was a big chance that the senior hunter would escape. But the disciplinary members with the Blazing Sun Medal rarely failed. It was said that they had evolved to the peak of the hunter's level. However, even such a character was imprisoned in prison. Moreover, her age was too young. Did she start to learn to fight when she was learning to walk? Dudian looked at Gwyneth and calmly said, I've investigated the aristocratic family you killed. They are called Laporte family. They are still in the inner wall. Even their industry has extended to the commercial district of the outer wall. I can help you if you want to exterminate them. But you have to assist me and listen to my words first. In addition, you have no other choice. Even if you kill me, you will be caught. The magistrate won't allow an existence like you to lurk outside. The aristocracy won't allow it either. Gwyneth was silent like a stone sculpture. Old man Nicholas and Sergei looked at each other in silence. The carriage rumbled along the path until it reached the border fortress. The coachman showed the clearance letter to the guard and smoothly entered the fortress. Dudian glanced at the three. It seems that the three of you have temporarily accepted your fate. In that case, I wish everyone a happy cooperation in the future. The three bowed their heads in silence. The old man Nicotine sighed. I never thought that the little fellows in their teens would all be so powerful. It seems like I'm really old. Dudian smiled. You don't think so? Nicholas smiled and shook his head. He didn't say anything. Dean took them directly to the castle on the Mosa River. He waited for everyone to get off the car. He looked at Nicholas. From now on, you are my butler. But don't play any tricks. Even if you want to play, don't let me find out. Then he went into the castle. Everyone followed him into the castle, sizing it up along the way. Dean said as he walked, Before you think about getting away from me, you have to solve a problem by yourself. What problem? Sergei frowned. Nicotine's eyes flickered as he said, Are you saying that we have to wash away our own identities? Dudian nodded. Yes. All the major consortiums are staring at me. The news of you being bailed out is bound to leak out. The consortiums that want to attack me will inevitably use you as a pretext. So you have to be ready for the first wave of problems. Sergei sneered. I'd like to see who dares to make trouble. Dudian glanced at him. Even a punisher like number 1 has been caught for killing an aristocrat. Don't think about it with your assassination skills. Sergei frowned and looked at Gwyneth. Hey, did you assassinate the nobles, or did you kill them? Gwyneth's hair was slightly blown by the wind, as if she didn't hear anything. Sergei's face slightly changed as he coldly snorted. Nicholas stared at Dudian. We have been imprisoned for too long. We are seriously out of touch with the outside world. It's impossible for us to compete with the 6 consortiums. What do you want us to do? Dudian indifferently smiled. It depends on your performance. Today you have just been released from prison. Go wash and rest. If there is anything else, we can talk about it in the evening. He looked at Scar and Jean. Both of you should take a rest. I'll help you pull out the nails. Sergei frowned. What about me? Dudian calmly said. You and number 1 should keep the nails for the time being. It's best not to pull them out without authorization. I don't mind nailing them. Sergei's heart sank. He knew that Dudian was afraid of his strength, so he used the nails to contain it. He cursed in his heart. Despicable boy. But there was nothing he could do about it. At night, the chef hired by Dudian had finished cooking the dishes. 2 of the youngest maids from the Ryan family brought the dishes to the table. They stood respectfully on both sides of the table. Dean was the first to take a seat. He could smell that Nicholas, Sergei, number 1, and others were all over the castle and were rushing over to them. Jean and Scar were the first to sit. Jean was a knight of light from the Holy Church. Because of his family's mistakes, he was exempted from his duties and imprisoned to atone for his crimes. Scar was a senior primary hunter. The reason why he was imprisoned was that he had returned home after hunting. He saw a rich aristocrat from a consortium raping his wife and daughter. In a fit of rage, he killed him and was sentenced to prison. Fortunately, the rich aristocrat's family was only a second-rate aristocrat. He had many brothers and sisters, so his death didn't cause too much of a sensation. Otherwise, Scar would have been sentenced on the spot. Both of them came to the table. They glanced at the seats and consciously sat in the 3rd row. Dudian glanced at them but didn't say anything. Chapter 272. Both of them looked at the table. Nicholas calmly pulled out the 2nd row of seats and sat down. Sergei pulled out the 1st row of seats and sat down. He looked at the table full of delicious food. He took a deep breath and excitedly reached out to grab a roasted pheasant leg in front of him. Whoosh! A silver light shot out and nailed itself to the table half an inch in front of his finger. It was a silver table knife. Sergei's face slightly changed as he turned to look at Dean. What do you mean? Dudian indifferently said, There are family rules. If you eat on my table, then you must abide by my rules. By the way, this is the 2nd time I forgive you. Finished. He looked at the maid next to him. Give me another knife. Yes. The maid was silent out of fear. Sergei's face changed as he retracted his hand. You have a lot of rules. It's better to write them down. I'm a rough person, so I don't want to break your rules. Dean indifferently said, My rules are very simple. There's only one rule. Be a good person. You only need to abide by this rule. Sergei slightly frowned as he coldly snorted and turned away. At this time, the sound of footsteps echoed as a girl slowly came down from the stairs. Dean looked up, and a trace of surprise flashed in his eyes. He saw that the girl was as beautiful as an elf. Her complexion was abnormally pale, and she looked somewhat weak. But her pair of silver moon-like eyebrows had a bit of heroic spirit. Her eyes were black, like 2 deep pools with death and coldness. Her whole body was wrapped in a loose red robe. Her hair was extremely long, tied behind her head and hanging down her waist. When she walked, her steps were not big, like a spirit in the dark. Sergei, Nicholas, Scar, Jean, and the others looked up. There was a trace of amazement on their faces. They had been imprisoned in prison for several years. Not to mention such a beautiful girl. They didn't even see a fat woman. Sergei's eyes flashed with a trace of passion. His fingers that were holding the knife slightly tightened. He didn't know that this small movement was seen by Nicholas, who was sitting opposite him. The girl was Gwyneth. She silently came down the stairs and sat in the first row. She looked at Dean. "I'm hungry." Dean nodded. "Everyone is here. Let's start." Nicholas laughed. "Do we need to pray before eating?" Sergei's eyebrows rose as he looked at Dean. He was about to stab the roasted pheasant leg. Dean indifferently said, "No, we don't believe in God." Then he picked up the knife handed by the maid and picked up the grilled steak in front of him. "Tomorrow Sergei will get up early and go out with me." "Nicholas, I'll leave the castle to you. If anyone comes looking for me, refuse them all and say that I'm busy. Remember, don't reveal my whereabouts." Nicotine's eyes flashed as he nodded. "I understand." Sergei bit the drumstick and said, "Where are we going to work?" "You'll know when the time comes." Gwyneth cut the foie gras on her plate and asked, "What about me?" Dean looked at her. "Your task is very simple. There are 10 potted plants in the yard. Help me take good care of them. Don't let them die." Gwyneth frowned as she stared at him. She lowered her head and continued to cut the foie gras. Scar and Jean looked at Dean. "What are we going to do? You have just pulled out the nails. Rest well." Dean didn't raise his head as he replied. After dinner, everyone returned to their respective rooms. The next morning, Dean got up on time. He asked the maid to wake up Sergei, who was still sleeping soundly. He left the castle in a carriage under the escort of Nicholas. There was a trace of coldness in Nicholas's eyes as he looked at the carriage gradually going away. He turned back to the castle and carefully looked at the 2 young maids who were cleaning the dust in the hall. He confirmed that they didn't have extraordinary power. He went up the stairs to the 2nd floor and deliberately walked to his room with heavy footsteps. When he came to the corridor of his room, he bent down and took off his shoes. He stepped on the carpet with his socks on. His figure flashed through the corridor and came to another corridor. This was Dean's room. He came to the front of the room, took out a handkerchief from his pocket, and put it on the doorknob. He gently twisted the door and found that the door was not closed. With a slight pull, the door was opened. Surprised, he looked inside through the crack of the door and saw a beautiful figure standing in front of the desk in the room. She tilted her head and looked at the crack of the door. The figure was Gwyneth. Nicholas's heart tightened, but he was relieved. He opened the door and quietly came in. He locked the door and smiled. "It seems that we have the same purpose." Gwyneth's eyes didn't contain the slightest emotion. She indifferently looked at him, but didn't speak. Being stared at by her, Nicotine felt a little unnatural. Coughing lightly, he said, "You're here to look for the bale, right? Have you found it?" Gwyneth quietly looked at him. "I just came in." Nicholas was relieved. "Let's look for it together. But don't leave any traces or fingerprints. The power behind this kid isn't small, and he is on guard against us. If he comes back to check his fingerprints, then he will know that we have come in." Gwyneth was silent. Nicotine was used to her silence. Seeing that she was silent, he walked around the room and looked around. He pulled open the wardrobe and other places. A moment later, he knocked on the bottom of one of the wardrobes. He immediately knew that there was a hidden compartment inside. He immediately pulled out the clothes that were in the way and looked through the gap. He opened the splint inside and revealed a hidden drawer. He was happy. Found it. Gwyneth came over and silently looked at him. Nicholas saw the keyhole on the secret drawer. He immediately put his hand into his pocket and took out a small iron needle. He inserted it into the keyhole. After a moment, he heard a clicking sound and the secret drawer loosened. His face showed a bit of complacent smile. He pulled out the secret drawer and saw a stack of white papers. But it wasn't the documents he had imagined. Instead, it was some sketches with strange shapes. He carefully opened it with a handkerchief and found that it was all sketches. He slightly frowned. "There is an envelope next to it," Gwyneth said. Hearing her words, Nicotine's eyes fell on the envelope next to him. He had already noticed this, but judging from its size and thickness, it was obviously not a bail letter. However, now that he had already looked through the other things, it didn't matter if there was only this one left. He immediately picked up the envelope and found that there was no paste on it. Feeling strange, he carefully opened the envelope and poured out a piece of paper from the thin envelope. "Don't go through my things. Return them to where they were." A note. Nicotine was stunned on the spot, dumbfounded. Chapter 273. After leaving the Mosa River, Dean ordered the carriage to go to the nearest raw material market. What are we going to do there? Sergei, who was sitting in the same carriage, looked at Dean in surprise. Dean glanced at him. What do you think we can do in the raw materials market? By raw materials? Sergei held back his displeasure. Aren't you going to take me to hunt outside the giant wall? Dean rolled his eyes. How many can you kill without a weapon? Sergei snorted and proudly said, even if I'm unarmed, I can kill hundreds of monsters below level 20 in a day. But if I wait for my body to recover, that's too little. Dean shook his head. Sergei was stunned. Too little. Pitifully little. After a moment, both of them came to the raw materials market in the Eastern District. The area of the market was very large. It was about the size of a small town. It contained raw materials of various materials. The roads were extremely spacious so that they could shuttle through the market. It was still early, but there were a lot of people gathered in the market. They were waiting in front of various chambers of commerce. If one took a closer look, one would know that these chambers of commerce had discount activities today. Dean ordered the coachman to go directly to the steel market. Among all kinds of minerals, coal, and other natural raw materials, steel was one of the new materials produced by the Temple of Elements. The history of steel was decades earlier than plastic. It was called an artificial raw material like plastic, although the history of steel wasn't as good as coal and raw minerals, but the demand wasn't inferior to the former. There were many chambers of commerce selling steel in the raw materials market. Tens of thousands of tons of steel were traded every day. Dean knew that behind such a huge turnover was the rapid transformation of the living environment within the giant wall. However, due to the limitations of the current smelting technology, the quality of the steel in the market was far from what he needed. It could only be used to make ordinary firearms and hot weapons such as cannons. The quality of the steel was far from enough to make tanks, armored vehicles, and so on. Therefore, Dean was ready to refine and temper the steel to improve the purity. But to get satisfactory steel, he needed to pass through the electroslag remelting environment, which required the use of electricity. As the saying goes, pull one hair and move the whole body. Dudian had planned to make a generator, but not a modern generator, but an early hand-cranked DC generator. Dudian got off the carriage and took Sergei to a steel chamber of commerce. If you remember correctly, the backing of this steel chamber of commerce was the Huashan Consortium. At present, the only consortium that wouldn't fall out with the Ryan family was the Huashan Consortium. Although they had sold the military crossbow to the Ryan family last time, but this was a negotiation. They wouldn't become enemies because of it. Moreover, it was a matter of mutual consent. Unfortunately, our consortium doesn't have a chamber of commerce. Dean looked at the majestic gate of the Chamber of Commerce and sighed in his heart. He walked into the Chamber of Commerce. Welcome, the maid at the door said respectfully. Dean came into the hall. The magnificent hall made people feel small, but he was used to such luxurious clothes. He glanced around, and a beautiful middle-aged woman quickly came over. She glanced at the tall and sturdy Sergei and smiled. Master, what do you need? Dudian calmly asked. What is the best steel model? The best steel is the X30 type. The middle-aged woman smiled. Dudian nodded. Okay, I want to order 10 tons. 10 tons? The middle-aged woman's eyes lit up. No problem. Do you know the price? Yes. Dudian nodded. The middle-aged woman was relieved. Please wait a moment. She hurried away. Sergei looked at Dudian and asked, why did you come to buy steel? Do you know a powerful craftsman? Even if you want to save money, you shouldn't be so frugal. Dudian whispered, shut up. Sergei's eyebrows slightly raised as he looked down at the boy. He clenched his fingers but didn't speak again. Hey, this person is... Suddenly, a surprised voice echoed from the side. Dudian looked over and saw a 17 or 18-year-old girl looking at him. She was dressed in simple clothes, but Dudian saw a medal on her chest. It was a hexagonal shield. It was the medal of the Temple of Elements. The pattern of the medal was a golden hand, which represented the metal element faction. It's really me. The girl's eyes widened as she saw Dudian's face. Are you Architect Dean? Dean didn't expect to meet an architect from the Temple of Elements here. It seems that his reputation in this circle is really resounding. He nodded. Hello, it's me. The girl was surprised. My name is AI Lawn. It's an honor to see you in person. Dadian smiled. You are too polite. The girl suddenly thought of something. I remember that you are an architect from the wood element faction. What are you doing here? Are you here to buy steel? Are you going to add steel to your new invention? His eyes were full of excitement and worship. Although Dean's military crossbow belonged to wood element, but the crossbow bolt was made of metal. So it was a combination of wood element and metal element. However, wood element was the dominant element. For an oracle, it was already very impressive to be able to mobilize the elements they belonged to and create a new divine art. It was even more difficult to add other elements into it, and it also proved a kind of talent and attainments from the side. Dadian smiled. Maybe my new invention will be a metal element one. The girl covered her mouth. You really know how to joke. If that's the case, then you are an architect of two elements, and both of them are very powerful. Dadian smiled, but didn't say anything. AI Lawn, who are you talking to? A voice echoed from behind. AI Lawn looked back and saw a young man dressed in an expensive suit. He was tall and had blonde hair. He was full of noble temperament and had a medal on his chest. He was also an architect of metal element. The young man came forward and pulled AI Lawn. He looked at Dadian with hostility. If he didn't notice the 2 meters tall bodyguard standing behind Dadian, he would have given him a cold face. AI Lawn saw that the young man didn't recognize Dadian, so she excitedly introduced him. Is the genius architect, Dean. He is the youngest person to win the epic medal. We are so lucky to meet him here. The young man was startled as he looked at Dadian. The hostility on his face didn't fade, but became thicker. He pulled AI Land's hand. AI Lawn, come with me. I have something to tell you. He grabbed her hand and turned away. AI Lawn was at a loss, but didn't resist. Dean quietly watched. He saw that the two of them had walked to a corner far away from his line of sight. The youth lowered his voice and said, Don't get close to this person. He is too dangerous. Dangerous? You don't understand. Although this person is talented, but he is arrogant. He has offended a big consortium. Our family will be in trouble if people know that I have been in contact with him. Is it that serious? Well, don't get close to him in the future. I hope that no one saw what happened just now. Dudien's eyes lit up as he heard their voices. Chapter 274. After a while, the middle-aged woman came back. Dudien paid the deposit and scheduled the time to receive the goods. He left the Chamber of Commerce and went to other parts of the raw materials market to check the degree of purification. At noon, Dudien and Sergei arrived at the Ryan family. Old Feline's eyes were attracted by Sergei, who was standing behind Dudien. There was a trace of fear in his eyes as he looked at Dudien. You're right on time. We're about to eat. Dudien smiled. I'm here for the meal. Who is this? Old Feline looked at Sergei. Dudien smiled. He is the one who was bailed out in your name. His name is Sergei Sergei. He is a senior hunter from the Krulov Consortium. Senior hunter? Jake, Sandro, and the others who were sitting on both sides of the table were surprised when they heard Dean's words. Their faces were full of awe and fear, but they were more excited and excited. Even though they were the children of the third generation, they knew the value of a senior hunter. At the end of the table, the girl named Lena showed the same expression as the others, curiously looking at Sergei. Dudien looked at Sergei. This is the patriarch of the Ryan family, Old Feline. Hurry up and thank him. Sergei quickly glanced at the surroundings as he entered the restaurant. There was something strange in his heart. Whether it was the external structure or the internal decoration of the castle, they were extremely rough and simple. It could even be called simple and crude. He noticed the guards along the way. There were knights with knights' medals. Their eyes were sloppy and their posture was lazy. It was as if they didn't have any bones. At first glance, he knew that they were ordinary people, but everything he had seen showed that the background of the castle was poor. How could such an aristocrat have the funds to bail him out? He suddenly remembered the time when he returned from the Thornflower prison. Dean's confident and mysterious eyes were on the carriage. He glanced at the teenager in front of his chest. There was a faint smile on his face as he looked at old Feline. "Hello, patriarch. I'm Sergei." Old Feline was afraid, but he was calm on the surface. He slightly nodded. "Aunt Lon, give Mr. Sergei a seat." Auntie Lon, a middle-aged woman, immediately asked a maid to bring a heavy chair over. If it was in the past, Sergei would have already sat down. He didn't even put a noble in his eyes. When he was in the Krulov Consortium, a small noble like this would bow and scrape in front of him. He already knew how these nobles changed their faces in front of others. But at this moment, seeing that Dudyan didn't sit down, he also refrained from sitting down. He was secretly unhappy in his heart. He wanted to get rid of the little devil's control and completely restore his freedom. Dudyan invited old Feline to take a seat before following him. They casually chatted about some interesting things. Dudyan asked Sergei to wait downstairs after the meal while he followed old Feline. Sandro helped him to go upstairs. Dean winked at Sandro after entering the room. Sandro nodded and immediately dismissed the nearby maids. "Is there still no movement from Melon Consortium?" Dudyan whispered to old Feline after he smelled that there were no other smells lurking around. Old Feline shook his head. "Not yet. I've seen their resumes. You can't control them even if you bail them out. These murderers aren't small characters. The specific process and purpose of their crimes have long been verified. Although Sergei has a big body, but his eyes are focused. I think he is a person with a deep mind. You should be careful." Dudyan always believed in old Feline's eyes. He nodded. "I will. It's the Melon Consortium that hasn't made any movement for so long. Perhaps they have already made their move, but we haven't discovered it yet. We must find out the direction of their actions as soon as possible." Melon Consortium was like a thorn in his heart. The sooner it was pulled out, the easier it would be. Old Feline sighed. "We have a small number of people and a weak foundation. The strength of the investigation is too weak." How did he not know this? He felt the same regret in his heart. This was the lack of manpower. He pondered a little. "I'll send Barton and the other two to investigate this matter." "Them?" Old Feline looked at him. "Can they be trusted?" "Yes," Dudyan said. "They've been trained by you for a long time. They must have adapted to the life in the commercial district. They know how to do things. It's good that they can be trusted." Old Feline was relieved as he heard Dudyan's answer. So far, Dudyan hadn't let him down, so he was more convinced by Dudyan's choice. "Today you brought this person. The other four are in your residence. You have to be careful." Although old Feline expected that Dudyan would be on guard, he still reminded him. Dudyan nodded and continued to discuss other things with old Feline. Then he left the room. When he went downstairs, he immediately saw Sergei sitting on a chair in the hall. Hugh Tun, Jake, and a few other third-generation juniors surrounded him. Their faces were full of politeness, with a hint of flattery, and they kept taking the initiative to find topics to get closer to him. "Mr. Dean?" "Mr. Dean was bailed out by my grandfather," he replied with a smile. Dudyan's eyes lit up when he heard Hugh's words. His footsteps on the stairs were a bit heavier. It caught Sergei's attention. He looked up at Dudyan. There was a faint smile on his face. Hugh and others didn't speak as they saw Dudyan come over. Dudyan went straight to the door. "It's time to go back." Sergei smiled and stood up. He looked at Jake and others. "I'll go back first. See you later." He followed Dean's figure to the carriage outside the castle. Zindral, Jake, and others went out to see them off. The carriage slowly left the ancient castle. Sergei leaned against the car and smiled at Dudyan. "Do you want to disguise it as a cooperative relationship? Old Feline was kidnapped by you after you broke out of the prison. Unfortunately, his children think that you are loyal to their father. They don't know that you can kill him at any time. You didn't do that. Is there anything else that you want the old man to help you?" Dudyan was silent and indifferent. Sergei was more proud as he saw Dudyan acquiesce. "I didn't expect you to be an architect of the Temple of Elements at such a young age. Hunters are civilians. You don't have a backer. You are the mastermind behind the scenes. You bailed us out. Do you want to use us to help you take revenge?" Sergei was more proud as he laughed. "I didn't expect you to be an architect of the Temple of Elements," Dudyan indifferently said. When it comes to skills, I'll have to ask you for advice. I'll leave the training ground behind the castle to you. I'll rebuild it like the Hunter College. Starting from tomorrow, I'll train the hunters systematically. You'll be my instructor for the time being." Sergei snorted as he saw Dudian change the topic. "My training is very strict. I'm afraid that you'll cry." The sky was getting dark at dusk. Nicholas, Gwyneth, Scar, Jean, and others were having dinner in the castle. Jean looked at the empty seat and asked Nicholas, "Won't the young master come back tonight?" Now that he had decided to follow Dudian, he changed the way he addressed Dudian. He didn't dare to call him Dean at will. Nicholas glanced at him and said, "You're asking me. Who should I ask? I heard that you and he were cellmates on the same floor. Can you tell me how he escaped?" Scar snorted. "Dean, Master bailed you out. You'd better know your place. Moreover, you're not young. You won't be able to live for more than a few years. You should be content to live a stable life in your later years. What else do you want?" Nicholas's face turned cold. "You know that I'm old. You should have the attitude of an old man." Scar sneered. "Do you think that we're good people who respect the elderly?" Nicotine looked at him for a moment, then suddenly smiled and said, "You're right." Then he turned his head and continued to eat his food. At this time, the sound of hooves echoed from outside. The maid at the door shouted in surprise, "The young master is back." Scar and Jean put down their tableware and went out to greet the young master. Nicholas's eyes flashed. He also got up and went out. Only Gwyneth didn't move. She continued to eat the food in her bowl. Dudian opened the door and patted Sergei's arm. "You've worked hard today. You should rest early tonight. Tomorrow we'll expand the training ground. If you don't have enough manpower, then rent a few slaves." Sergei sneered in his heart. Isn't it too late? But he still had a smile on his face. There's no need to be so troublesome for such a small matter. "But I won't show any mercy to you." Dudian laughed as he didn't mind. It seemed that he was in a very good mood. He turned around and saw Scar and Jean coming out of the hall. He took back his hand from Sergei's arm. "Have you eaten?" Jean was embarrassed. "I just ate. I thought that you wouldn't come back." Dudian smiled. "It's okay. Let's go and eat together." He took the lead to enter the house. He looked at Nicholas, who was smiling at him. Dudian nodded and entered the dining room. Gwyneth saw Dudian enter the hall. She looked up and whispered, "Master." Chapter 275. Go and prepare the tableware. Ask the chef to add a snowy steak. Nicholas ordered the maid as he returned to the dining room. "Yes." The maid quickly ran to the kitchen. Dudian stopped the maid. "Cook a few more portions. You will have a good appetite in the evening." "Yes." The maid hurriedly answered, turned around, and left quickly. "I didn't expect you to come back tonight." Nicholas pulled out a chair and sat down. "If I knew it would be like this, I would have asked the chef to prepare it." Dudian smiled. "How is it? Are you used to living here?" Nicholas saw Dudian smile and suddenly remembered the note he had found in the morning. His heart secretly jumped, but on the surface he looked as usual. At least it is much more comfortable than the prison. The scenery of the river outside is also good. Dudian smiled. After a moment, the maid served the dinner and he began to eat. He chatted with several people while eating. After the dinner was over, he got up and went back to his room. After closing the door, Dean glanced at his wardrobe and went to the desk next to him. He took out a match and lit the oil lamp. He took out a small black carving knife and a piece of wood from the drawer. He grabbed the knife with his unconscious left hand and gently scratched the wood carving. The marks were sometimes deep and sometimes shallow. His control of strength was still extremely rusty. Dudian quietly practiced the control of his left hand. At the same time, he thought about other things. The night passed by quickly. The next day, Dudian woke up on time and found that Nicholas got up earlier than him. He also woke up the maids. Nicholas looked up and smiled as he saw Dudian coming down the stairs. "Master, good morning. The hot water has been prepared for you." He looked like a real butler. His attitude was respectful, and there was nothing wrong with him. Dudian used the hot water and a towel from the maid to wash his face and rinse his mouth. He came to the dining room and sat down. "Good spirit today." Nicholas respectfully said, "Master is overpraising me." Dudian looked at his shoulder. How is the wound healing? Nicholas smiled. I'm old. The speed of healing isn't as fast as you young people. Sometimes, when a wound heals too quickly, it heals and forgets the pain. Dudian smiled. If the resume isn't wrong, then you have relied on your wealth to buy God's blessing. Your physique has been upgraded to intermediate hunter level. Nicotine's eyes flashed. Master, I'm just a primary hunter. There is still a long way to go before I become an intermediate hunter. Dudian smiled. A primary hunter couldn't break free from the encirclement of 2 teams of Knights of the Magistrate and killed 4 official Knights of the Magistrate. Nicotine smiled and said, Misinformation. It's just a rumor. It's just a rumor. I don't have the ability to kill a knight. Maybe. Dean faintly smiled. At this moment, the sound of hooves could be heard from outside. Nicotine said, It should be the postman delivering the newspaper. I'll go take a look. He turned and left the hall. After a moment, he came back with 2 newspapers in his hand. He handed them to Dean. Master, your newspaper. Dudian nodded and took the newspapers. As he flipped through the newspaper, Nicotine slowly retreated. Soon, a maid brought in breakfast, milk, fried eggs, and meat rolls. Dean ate and read the newspaper. His military crossbow occupied a large page in the financial newspaper. Recently, the war at the border was tight. There were many news reports about the border, especially about the dynamics of various military goods and the transfer of military personnel. All the news agencies were paying attention to them from time to time. Does the Mellon Consortium want to wait for the limelight to pass? Dudian looked at the newspaper of the Mellon Consortium. It mentioned that the direction of the Mellon Consortium revolved around the mining industry and the medical industry. These were the 2 strongest weapons in the hands of the Mellon Consortium. The competitor of the mining industry was the Scott Consortium. The Scott Consortium was the largest operator of the mining industry. They still occupied the majority of the channels and market share. But in the medical industry, the Mellon Consortium was in an invincible state. The medical industry of the Mellon Consortium occupied more than 70% of the market in the 3 districts of the Outer Wall. 6 of the top 10 hospitals belonged to the Mellon Consortium. One of the remaining 4 was a partnership between the Mellon Consortium and the Green Consortium. But it was only a matter of time before the Mellon Consortium would be completely annexed. The medical industry is the biggest weapon of the Mellon Consortium. It's the main reason for its rapid rise. Dudian's eyes lit up. If we can give a heavy blow to the medical industry, then the Mellon Consortium will be hit hard. He quietly read the newspaper as he pondered. As time passed, Sergei, Scar, Jean, and others got up and went downstairs to eat breakfast. Master, I won't call you master when we are on the training ground, Sergei said as he chewed the meat. Dudian put down the newspaper and indifferently said, Don't eat greasy food in the morning. I like it. Sergei snorted. After breakfast, Dudian and Sergei went to the back of the castle. There was a circle of stones in the training ground. It was a place for knights and guards to train. It was about 7,000 or 8,000 square meters. There were different training tools. Your physical strength is barely comparable to a senior hunter. The magic marks haven't transformed yet. Let's skip the simple introductory courses. Let's go straight to the hard part. Sergei grinned. I heard that you are a hunter. Hunters test eyesight, arm strength, and endurance. Let's exercise your arm strength this morning. Be careful not to break your arm. Dudian indifferently smiled. His left hand should have recovered by now, as the stitches should have healed. Sergei smiled as he saw that Dudian didn't reply. Do you know about frogs? The first lesson is to stand upside down in frog posture. Bend your elbows at 90 degrees and keep your legs close to each other. It will also exercise your balance. Dudian smiled. You should know that I have a way to go to the hunter school to know their training courses. If you teach something different, then you know the consequences. Sergei's smile stiffened. Then go and inquire about it. In his heart, he was secretly rejoicing. Fortunately, he was cautious, and the first frog stand he chose was in the hunter school. Dudian looked at him and did as he was told. Sergei sneered. The best training time for an ordinary person who hasn't improved their physique is 1 hour and 20 minutes. Although it's your first exercise, you should at least do it for 3 or 4 hours. Dudian bent his elbows and said, "You can go and expand the training ground first." Sergei shrugged. "Don't be lazy. I'll keep an eye on you." Then he turned and left. A carriage arrived outside the castle while Dudian was training. There was a flag of the Green Consortium on it. An elegant middle-aged man got off the carriage. He was friendly to the maid at the door. The maid immediately went into the room to inform Nicholas. Nicholas was looking at the training ground from the window upstairs. He was startled when he heard the maid's report. He immediately went downstairs to greet the middle-aged man. "Hello." Nicholas smiled politely. "I'm Mr. Dean's butler, and you are?" The middle-aged man smiled. "I'm representing the Green Consortium. I'm here to visit Architect Dean. Is he inside?" "Architect?" Nicholas was startled. It's not convenient for him at the moment. "If there's nothing important, I can pass the message." The middle-aged man smiled. "It's an important matter. It's better to talk to him face to face. I can wait for him." Seeing him say this, Nicholas could only say, "All right, please." He led the middle-aged man into the living room and ordered the maid to serve him tea. "I didn't expect Architect Dean to be so thrifty." After entering the hall, the refined middle-aged man glanced around and said with a smile, "If you don't have enough money, please tell our Green Consortium." Nicholas smiled. "Young master has always been thrifty. How would I dare to trouble the Green Consortium for a little money?" The middle-aged man waved his hand. "What trouble? As long as Architect Dean is willing to sell the new invention to the Green Consortium, we'll give him a castle. It's a small matter." Nicholas was shocked. He used to mix with the aristocrats. He knew the identity of an architect. He didn't expect that Dean was not only an architect, but also an extraordinary one. Even the Green Consortium had to send someone to curry favor with him. He thought about the castle from top to bottom, but didn't see any item. "Our young master hasn't finished his new invention. It's not too late to talk about it after he finishes." The middle-aged man looked at him strangely. He didn't expect Dean to be so lenient towards his subordinates. He even dared to meddle in the master's affairs. But he thought that Dean was an architect and was wholeheartedly focused on the invention. He was relieved, but his attitude towards Nicholas was a bit cold. He thought that if his butler was replaced by Nicholas, then he would have already scolded him. However, Green Consortium is willing to buy it in advance. The price will definitely satisfy Architect Dean. Green Consortium smiled. Even if it isn't done well, Green Consortium is willing to buy it in advance. The price will definitely satisfy Architect Dean. Nicholas had been a butler for many years, so his mind was sharp. He knew that the other party was disgusted when he saw the faint smile on the other's face. He didn't ask any more questions, but he was surprised in his heart. Did he think that the new invention wouldn't be bad? Where did this confidence come from? Or could it be that Dean had already finished the invention, but put it in the temple, and the Green Consortium got the news? Chapter 276. On the training ground, Dean was standing upside down in a frog-like posture. The fingers of his left hand were gently rubbing the sand on the ground, although his left hand didn't have any feeling. But he could use his vision to replace the effect of his left hand's movement. By rubbing the sand, he could exercise the flexibility of his fingers. Although the effect wasn't as good as sculpting, but at the moment he was exercising the endurance of his arm. His fingers were idle. Even if there was only a little effect, it was worth it. The most difficult problem was that he couldn't determine the state of his arm. He couldn't even feel the movement of his fist. So he could only rely on visual assistance to exercise. But in a fight, he couldn't focus on the enemy's movements. How could he pay attention to his hand? Therefore, he had to train the feeling of the left hand into an instinct to be able to play a role. Like now, his left hand could cause damage to the door or cup. It was no different from a crippled arm. Time passed. Gray radiation clouds covered the sky. The light was gloomy. The season was about to enter the black snow season. Most of the monsters outside the giant wall had returned to their nests to hibernate. There were few monsters that came out to hunt during the black snow season. This season was also the peak season for hunters. They didn't need to worry about encountering the demon tide. It was easy to meet lone hunters. At the same time, it was also easy to meet lone dormant monsters. In the blink of an eye, it was noon. Sergei was so tired that his forehead was full of sweat. He didn't dare to do too much as he didn't want to tear the wound. He looked back at Dean but saw that the boy was still standing upside down like a stone sculpture. His right arm was slightly trembling, but his left arm was motionless. Left-handed, his endurance is very good. There was a trace of appreciation in Sergei's eyes. Previously, when he was expanding the training ground, he would look back to monitor Dean from time to time. He found out that the boy was more self-disciplined than he had imagined. Dean didn't think about being lazy, and his endurance was very strong. According to his speculation, it would be good if Dean could persist for 5 hours. This was a relatively difficult task for a senior hunter. After all, the longer he maintained the same posture, the more difficult it would be. The world in Dean's eyes was upside down. He saw Sergei taking a rest. Hurry up and expand. Don't be lazy. Sergei raised his eyebrows. You still have the mind to supervise me? Seems like I've been too kind to you. If you want to talk, talk while working. It's more efficient. Dudian indifferently said. Sergei's face twitched. He coldly snorted and turned around to continue moving the stone blocks. Dean stood up after half an hour. He shook his sore right hand and said to Sergei, Let's go back to eat. We will continue in the afternoon. Then he turned and left the training ground. Sergei sighed and wiped the sweat from his forehead. He turned around and quickly followed. Dean went back to the living room and looked at the elegant middle-aged man. Who are you? In fact, when the former arrived in the morning, he had already smelled the scent of the other party. He guessed that the other party was most likely a lobbyist sent by other consortiums. The elegant middle-aged man quickly stood up from the chair and smiled. Architect Dean, I'm here on behalf of the Green Consortium. I want to talk to you about the sale of the new invention. Nicholas saw that Dean had finished his training, so he ordered the maid to hand over a towel to wipe his sweat. Dean nodded and went to the dining room. He poured himself a cup of tea. What's the price for the new invention? The elegant middle-aged man didn't expect Dean to be so direct, but it saved him some time. Our price will absolutely satisfy you. What do you think about buying it at the price of a 3-star item? Dean was surprised. He didn't expect the Green Consortium to be the same as the Scott Consortium. He didn't think that the Green Consortium would dare to offer such a high price. However, it also proved that his current value was far higher than when he had just escaped from prison. He had to spend a lot of time and energy to prepare 100,000 gold coins to rent the passage. But now he was sitting at home and didn't do anything. Someone came to his door to give him money. Moreover, the price of a 3-star item was at least 100,000 gold coins. However, he could understand why. After all, he had only produced 2 divine arts in total. One was a new type of textile machine, which was at the legendary level and had the significance of reform. The other one was a 4-star high-grade artifact, which had established his status. It was not simply luck that made him popular. With these 2 divine arts as a guarantee, these consortiums had such strong confidence. 3-star grade. Nicotine's pupil slightly contracted. Although he knew that Dean wasn't an ordinary architect, but he didn't expect the price to be higher than what he had imagined. Dean dared to give such a high price without even seeing the item. Didn't it prove that Dean's level was far beyond the 3-star grade? Was he a master? If Dean was in his 30s, then maybe Nicholas would think so. But the person in front of him was just a teenager. Dean thought for a moment and slowly shook his head. Thank you for the kindness of your consortium, but forget about this matter. Forget about it? The middle-aged man was surprised. He didn't expect that he would be rejected at such a price. He couldn't help but ask, why? Mr. Dean, have you signed a contract with another consortium? No, Dean said bluntly as he saw that the middle-aged man didn't give up. I can't accept this price. By the way, can I trouble you to tell me that my new invention is about to be completed? I can accept advance booking, but the price is 5-star item. 5-star item? Middle-aged man almost bit his tongue. He looked at Dudian in astonishment. Mr. Dean, are you right? Dean solemnly replied, yes, 5-star item. Only then did the elegant middle-aged man confirm that he did not mishear. He was stunned for a moment and smiled bitterly. Mr. Do, why do you do this? Even if you want to refuse, you don't have to do this. Or you can tell me another price. How about 3-star upper grade? Nicholas's heart skipped a beat. 3-star item? Was this the base price given by the Green Consortium? Weren't they thinking too highly of the kid? Dean shook his head. Not 1 cent less than the price of 5-star item. The middle-aged man opened his mouth as he saw Dean's determined look. He thought that only a ghost would be willing to buy such a price. After all, he was young and frivolous. He didn't dare to say it out loud. It was meaningless to offend others for no reason. He shook his head and turned to leave. Nicholas couldn't help but look at Dean. He thought that the price was almost the same. He wouldn't be able to squeeze much out of Dean. Dean saw Nicotine's eyes and knew what he was thinking. He slightly shook his head as a signal to send him off. Nicholas was puzzled as he saw that Dean wasn't trying to blackmail him. But on the surface, he reacted quickly. He sent the middle-aged man out of the hall. Dean ordered the maid to serve the dishes and prepare lunch by the time Nicholas came back. Nicholas sat in his seat and looked at Dean, who was eating steak. He couldn't help but ask, "Master, are you a master from the Temple of Elements?" Dean didn't think that Nicholas would come to such a conclusion. If I was a master, then why would I need to be frugal? Nicotine couldn't help but ask, "If you are not a master, then why did you refuse the offer from the Green Consortium? The price they offered is already very high, close to 200,000 gold coins. This kind of opportunity is hard to come by. Has your new invention been appraised by the people in the temple and confirmed to be a 5-star invention?" Dean smiled. "I don't have such a strong relationship, but I am confident." "Confidence?" Nicholas's eyes widened. "Confidence?" Gwyneth, Jean, and others who were sitting on both sides of the table were surprised as they heard Nicholas's words. Scar gulped. "What 200,000 gold coins? What 5-star item?" Sergei knew that Dean was an architect when he bought the raw materials yesterday, but he didn't expect his position to be so high. Dean was able to produce a 5-star item. Even if he wasn't a master, then he was very close. Gwyneth's eyes lit up as she silently looked at Dean. After lunch, Duddian rested for a while. Then he took Sergei back to the training ground. This time they were still practicing frog stand, but he allowed Sergei to superimpose several lead plates on his feet. The total weight was about 300 pounds, which was more than twice his body weight. The effect of the exercise was greatly improved. Sergei looked at Dean's desperate appearance, but didn't say anything. He continued with his expansion project. In just 2 hours, Dean felt his right hand was sore and trembling. He knew that in addition to the weight on his feet, the main reason was that his arm was tired. He clenched his teeth and persisted. Sweat flowed down the bridge of his nose to his eyebrows, and then flowed down his eyebrows to his hair. Soon, the accumulated sweat dripped down from his hair and landed on the sand, drenching it. Time began to slow down. Every minute and second was extremely difficult to bear. It was difficult for Dean to think about other things. He used all his mind on how to divert his attention. At this time, he suddenly felt that his left hand was a kind of happiness. No matter how sore his right arm was, his left hand still didn't feel the slightest. But he knew that the degree of strain in his left hand was the same as his right arm. If the right arm couldn't bear it, the left hand would also suffer the same. Sergei secretly sneered as he looked at Dean's trembling body. He knew that Dean had reached his limit. The sky gradually darkened. The setting sun shone on the training ground, elongating 2 shadows. Sergei wiped his sweat as he looked back. He saw that Dean was still standing like a frog. Dean's body was trembling a bit more than before, but he was still controlling the lead plate so that it didn't tilt and fall. Damn kid! Sergei secretly clenched his teeth as he thought about other difficult training methods. After a moment, Dean shook his feet and threw the lead plates to the side. He stood up and gasped for breath. He wiped the sweat on his body and said to Sergei, "Let's go back to eat." Sergei was dissatisfied. "I didn't tell you to stop." "Who told you to stop? Didn't you say that I'm the instructor on the training ground?" Dean was startled as he looked at him. "Do you want to continue?" Sergei grunted. "Of course." Dean looked at him. "All right." He stood up again and let Sergei put the lead plates on his feet. He said, "You go too." It's still early, so don't stop. Sergei's face slightly changed. He gritted his teeth and turned to continue to move the stone blocks. Chapter 277. Damn, don't try to be brave and tear the wound. Sergei's face turned ugly. He used a towel to wipe the sweat on his shoulder to cover the wound. He slightly frowned as he felt the burning pain. Dean had smelled the smell of blood from Sergei's body. He knew the reason as he saw Sergei's action. His mouth curved into a smile as he continued to persist. Sergei looked back at Dudian. He saw that Dudian's arm was shaking, but he was still able to stabilize his body. Sergei's eyes were gloomy. He wanted to announce the end of the training so that his wound would not worsen. But just as the words were about to come out of his mouth, he suddenly stopped. He thought that if he were to admit defeat like this, he would definitely think that he was afraid of getting hurt when he saw his wound. When he thought of this, he steeled his heart and wrapped the towel in front of his chest. He gritted his teeth and continued to pick up the stone blocks on the ground and dismantle the wall. Dean saw that Sergei didn't say anything, but he didn't say anything and continued to hold his breath. After half an hour, Dean felt that his arm was reaching the limit. On the other side, Sergei's breathing was getting heavier. The white cotton towel was dyed blood red. It would inevitably cause a lot of damage if he continued to lose blood. Dean opened his mouth. Let's stop here for today. Sergei's heart was relieved. It was as if he had finally won a hard battle. He sneered, what's wrong? You can't hold on any longer? Dean raised his eyebrows. I'm afraid that you can't hold on. Sergei snorted. Me? I won't be affected even if you are tired. Dean's face turned cold. Is that so? Then let's continue. Let's continue. Sergei sneered. Don't shake your feet too much. Be careful of the lead plate. Dean sneered but didn't reply. He clenched his fingers into the sand. He clenched his teeth and tightened his body. He silently hypnotized himself to forget the soreness and fatigue. Time slowly passed. Jean, Scar, Gwyneth, and the others stood at the window sill behind the castle. They looked at the two stubborn men on the dark training ground with a bitter smile on their faces. At the same time, the blood in their hearts was slightly hot. Jean and Gwyneth were secretly competing against each other. At 9 o'clock in the evening, Sergei finally lost too much blood. He sat on the ground and couldn't stand up. His face was as pale as paper. His body was sweating and his hands and feet were trembling. Nicholas saw the situation from the window and immediately ran over. He asked the maid to prepare new towels and hot water. He helped Nicholas back to the castle. Dean threw off the last lead plate on his feet and fell straight to the ground. His whole body was soft. Scar and Jean rushed over to help him up and sent him back to the castle hall. Nicholas took out the medical box to bandage Dean's wounds when Dean returned. Nicholas's clothes were soaked in blood. He was lying on the chair. His face was weak and dispirited. Dean sat on the chair next to him. His hands were still trembling. His arms were still in a 90-degree position. He didn't dare to move even a little bit, especially his right hand. There was a strong soreness in his right arm. However, he didn't feel anything on his left hand. But considering the problem of exposing his left hand in front of Nicholas and others, he maintained the same posture as his right hand. Today, I admit defeat, Sergei said in a weak voice. He looked at Dean from the corner of his eyes. He didn't even have the strength to tilt his head. Dean was exhausted, but his body wasn't damaged. He had more physical strength than Sergei. A senior hunter is just so. Sergei's eyes twitched, but he didn't have the strength to refute. After a moment, Nicholas finished bandaging Sergei's wounds. He looked at both of them and smiled. Why are you doing this on the first day of training? It's too much. Dean panted. Let's eat. I'm hungry. Nicholas smiled slightly and turned to the maid to serve the meal. Scar and Jean helped Sergei to the dining table. Sergei was also helped to get to the table. Dean's arm was sore, so he could only let the maid next to him replace his arm and feed him. After eating, Dean felt that his physical strength had recovered. The soreness in his arms had reduced a lot. He got up and went upstairs. He closed the door with his shoulder. He sat on the bed and rested for a moment. He took out a wooden carving and a knife from the drawer and started to carve. Fortunately, his left hand didn't feel any pain, so he could move freely. He just needed to grab the carving with his right hand and carve with his left hand. After a few hours of exercise, Dean lay down and went to sleep in the early morning. The next day, Dean still got up on time. The first thing he felt after waking up was soreness. He gently lifted his right hand. The soreness made him slightly grit his teeth and inhale. After a night's sleep, his body still hadn't recovered. Yesterday, he had overdrawn himself too much. He had repeatedly exceeded his body's limit. He was completely relying on his unyielding spirit to persevere. Dean sat up, put on his shoes, and got out of bed. He shook his arms and went downstairs to the dining room. He saw that Nicholas had already woken up. He asked Nicholas to find hot water to soak his hands in. Breakfast was ready while Nicholas was soaking his hands. The newspaper was delivered at 6:30. Nicholas took the newspaper and served breakfast. Dean took out the hot water and wiped his hands. After soaking them for half an hour, he felt that the soreness in his arms had eased a lot. He didn't feel so unbearable when he bent his arms. He ate breakfast while picking up the newspaper to read. Military report. The new weapon military crossbow has been put into the war in the border war. The effect is surprising. Huashan Consortium has produced the first batch of military crossbows. There are only 2,000 of them. They have played an unexpected role in the defensive battle at the border fortress of Snow Mountain. The effect of melee combat is obvious. They have successfully defended against the attack of the aliens. The following is an interview with the commander of the defense of Snow Mountain, Colonel Bruno. Dean flipped through the newspaper. The headline news was about the war at Snow Mountain. He didn't expect that the fortress of Snow Mountain would be attacked by barbarians while he was training. Dean's eyes lit up. He estimated that the news had spread to the major consortia before it was published in the newspaper. He didn't expect that the barbarians would dare to take the initiative to attack the fortress. The military crossbow that he had produced was indeed lucky. It showed its greatest value at the right time. He continued to flip through other newspapers. Temple of Elements Daily, the youngest architect in history to win the Epic Medal. He has produced a 4-star item. The new item is in preparation. What kind of amazing work will the next one be? Green Consortium has reported that architect Dean's new item has entered the pre-sale state. The price is 5-star item. As Dean expected, he had become the focus of attention of the Temple of Elements. He was also the focus of the major consortia. One of the newspapers even wrote that he had recently bailed out Sergei and other 4 people. However, the one who bailed out was Old Feline. Only a noble could bail out such a felon. However, it was pointed out that he was also involved in the matter. The questioning words in this report were all an attempt to damage his reputation. Dean was relieved when he saw the source of the newspaper. It was from the Melon Consortium. Chapter 278. The newspapers of Melon and Krulov Consortium directly satirized the prize proposed by Dean. Words like arrogant, young, and frivolous, arrogant, and complacent were used to describe Dean. Moreover, with the idea of offending Dadian to the end, he even took the initiative to help Dadian in the newspaper. He commented that the reason why Dadian offered such a price was because he didn't put the master in his eyes after getting the Times Medal. He thought that his work could surpass the master's. Dean smiled indifferently as he read the newspaper. It was estimated that in a few days, the so-called surpassing master remarks would become his own words. No one would care about the truth at that time. Although he had expected it, he didn't think that the Krulov Consortium would be involved. Perhaps the reason was related to him bailing out Sergei. Dean sighed as he thought about Granita, who came to the castle and tried to invite him. It seemed that Granita was the one who coveted Sergei's beauty and wanted to rape him. He reckoned that Granita was very angry when she learned that Sergei was bailed out. When they first met, he felt that this woman looked familiar. Later on, he learned that she was a well-known beauty in the aristocratic circle. Even many realistic oil painting masters had painted her portrait, which was treasured by some wealthy merchants, landlords, and squires. It's impossible for the Krulov Consortium to be enemies with me, because of Sergei. Maybe they sent Granita to talk about cooperation, but she didn't get my military crossbow. That's why they got angry out of shame. There was a faint smile on his face. Dean put down the newspaper and gently rubbed his fingers. He was lost in thought. Nicholas stood next to Dean in a respectful manner. His eyes swept over the newspaper that Dean put on the table. Although the font was upside down from his point of view, it didn't prevent him from quickly and accurately skimming through all the information. His pupils shrank when he saw the words epic metal. He didn't think that Dean's identity in the temple would be so honorable. No wonder all the consortiums were paying close attention to him. They didn't hesitate to use the best layout for Dean. Nicholas's eyes flashed as he secretly looked at the boy. His fingers gently clenched in his sleeves. After a moment, Sergei, Gwyneth, and others went downstairs. Sergei's chest was wrapped with a white bandage. Except for the steel nail that was still oozing a faint dark red color, the blood did not spread to the surrounding area. The wound should have already scabbed. Nicotine's eyes flashed. It was indeed one of the top 10 rare steel dragon magic marks. The body's healing power was amazing. Sergei was standing on the stairs. His eyes swept towards the boy who had woken up and was eating breakfast in the dining room. His sleepy eyes slightly narrowed as he paused for a moment before continuing to walk down the stairs. Exercise in the morning and rest in the afternoon, Dean indifferently said as he looked at Sergei, who had a gloomy face. Rest in the afternoon? Sergei was slightly surprised. There was a bit of joy in his gloomy eyes, but he quickly realized his expression. He quickly put away his joy and said, "You are quite lazy." Dean glanced at him. "Is that so?" Sergei's back felt cold as he looked at Dean's smiling eyes. He turned his head and pulled out a chair to sit down. He looked at Nicholas. "What are you doing? Where's my breakfast?" Nicholas's mouth slightly twitched. He turned to the maid next to him. "Bring the breakfast." "Yes," the maid quickly replied. After breakfast, Dean returned to the training ground to continue his exercise. Scar and Jean joined him as he was halfway through his training. One of them said to Dean, "We have nothing to do. Let's move our muscles and bones." Dean didn't stop them, but reminded them, "Don't tear your wounds. We're going to hunt outside the giant wall." Both of them agreed and immediately changed their mind. They didn't learn from Dean's frog stand, but used other methods to exercise their waist, legs, and flexibility. Although such a high-intensity exercise, even if they persisted day after day for 10 years, the increase in strength wouldn't be as much as a bottle of God's blessing. But through the exercise, they would be able to master all parts of the body. Moreover, they would be able to exert twice the results with half the effort in battle. Sergei didn't pay attention to Scar and Jean. For him, his obligation was to teach Dean. As for the others, he was too lazy to pay attention to them. In the blink of an eye, it was noon. The four of them returned to the castle. After lunch, Scar and Jin's stomach had almost digested the lunch. They went back to the training ground to familiarize themselves with the skills of the past. Dean asked Gwyneth and Sergei to move the steel to the basement. There were several basements under the castle. Some were used to store goods, while others were used to expand the alchemy room. Dean told them to leave after the materials were delivered. He warned Nicholas that no one should disturb him while he was working on the invention. Dean closed the door of the alchemy room. He used the wood that was already prepared in the room to carve the model of the generator parts. He used his right hand to hold the knife while his left hand held the wooden board. With the previous experience of exercising his left hand, Dean felt that the flexibility and control of his right hand had improved a lot, and he was able to carve with ease. Shortly after Dean entered the alchemy room, Nicholas, Gwyneth, and Sergei appeared in a remote room. Nicholas looked at Sergei. There was a trace of vigilance in his eyes as he looked at Gwyneth. Now the three of us are in the same boat. The two little guys on the first floor are cellmates with the kid. Their relationship is extraordinary. They are determined to follow the kid. The three of us have to unite in order to get rid of the kid and completely restore our freedom. Sergei looked at him with interest. So, do you have a plan? Nicholas looked at him. We know nothing at present. It is a waste of time to make any plans. The first thing we have to do is to find out the details of the kid. As far as we know, the kid is not only a hunter, but also an architect of the Temple of Elements. From these two identities, we can infer that the kid's family was a commoner and relatively wealthy. But since the kid is a hunter, it means that his family doesn't have any power behind them. They have nothing to do with the nobles. Sergei chuckled. I don't need you to analyze this. Nicotine's face turned cold as he mocked. Is that so? Then tell me, what do you know? Didn't you go out with him the day before yesterday? Don't tell me that you didn't get anything. There was a trace of imperceptible coldness in his eyes. Sergei slightly sneered. At least more than you know. The day before yesterday, this kid took me to the raw materials market to buy steel. Today was the batch that was delivered. At that time, I knew that he was an architect of the temple. Moreover, his position was quite high. Yesterday, the Green Consortium came to invite him and offered such a high price. This kid's status in the temple is estimated to be close to that of a master, if not a master. The most important thing is that the kid doesn't have any power behind him. He is the mastermind. He doesn't have any power behind him. Nicholas's eyes flashed. Sergei indifferently said, the kid took me to the Ryan family. The Ryan family is as broken as the rumors say. They don't have the money to bail us out. The money must have been earned by the kid, using his identity as an architect. I guess that after the kid escaped from prison, he hijacked the Ryan family. Then he signed a contract with the Ryan family as a hunter. He seems to belong to the Ryan family, but in fact, the Ryan family is completely under his control. Therefore, the kid should be the mastermind behind the scenes. Judging from the fact that he was able to escape from prison, the kid's scheming is enough to do this. Nicholas looked at him deeply, nodded slowly, and said, that's not bad, but to be cautious, we need to grasp more information. Sergei snorted, but didn't say anything. Nicholas looked at the time. We can't stay together for a long time. We don't want to be noticed by the servants. All right, I'll go out first. Sergei shrugged his shoulders, then turned and left the room. Nicholas quietly came to the door and listened to the footsteps. When the footsteps gradually disappeared, he turned back to the room and asked Gwyneth, what do you think about what he said just now? Gwyneth quietly looked at him. What do you think? Nicholas rubbed his chin and said, when I saw them come back, this brat put his hand on him, and his attitude towards him changed greatly. I really can't trust him. That alone doesn't mean anything. Gwyneth whispered. Nicholas nodded. Yes, but we don't know if it's true or false, so it's better to isolate him. If he wasn't bought by the kid, then everything he said is true. But there are a lot of loopholes in his words. First of all, the kid is the mastermind behind the scenes, and the Ryan family is just a shield for him. So where did he learn the ability to make divine incantations? There is no such high level of knowledge in the library that can only be accessed by civilians. In addition, even if he has the ability to make inventions, don't forget that the power that put an intermediate hunter in prison is one of the 6 consortiums. Even if it's not, it's one of the top nobles. It's impossible that they don't know about the kid's escape. How can the Ryan family protect this kid if they know about it? Chapter 279. Hearing her words, the corners of Nicotine's mouth curled up imperceptibly, and he said in a low voice, we must first find out if he has been bribed by this brat. If he has been bribed, then this brat will use him to send us the wrong message, and we can also use him to send the wrong message to that brat. Gwyneth nodded. I'll go out so as not to arouse his suspicions, Nicholas said as he opened the door and went out. Gwyneth's eyes lit up as she looked at his back. Temple of Elements. 13th Castle. 2 figures were sitting in front of a tea table, drinking tea. There were a few newspapers next to them. The largest page of the newspaper was depicting a portrait of Dean. There was a smile on his face. He was full of gentleness and modesty. The kid hasn't produced a new invention yet, but he dares to offer a price of a 5-star invention. He's crazy. Ivissa glanced at the newspaper and slowly moved to Terrence's face. I didn't expect that the little guy who wanted to be my assistant would reach this step. From his military crossbow, it can be seen that the new textile machine that the little guy made wasn't a stroke of luck. He does have some rare talent, but he is too proud. Terrence snorted. Haven't we seen a lot of such geniuses? He was complacent for a moment. He was young and arrogant. He despised everything. But in the end, he fell down and was more miserable than anyone else. He couldn't get up no matter how hard he tried. He was completely reduced to a mediocre person. At the end of the day, the more glory one obtains now, the more it will turn into countless sharp swords stabbing into one's body when one falls, making it impossible for one to recover. Ivis's eyes lit up. You are right. But the kid seems to be very proud of his new invention. Even if it isn't a 5-star invention, it should be at least a 3-star or even a 4-star one. Otherwise, he wouldn't dare to boast like that. People who can come to this step have a little bit of brain. They won't be blinded by the current small achievements. I hope so, Terence said in a faint voice. But there was a trace of disdain in his expression. Ivissa didn't seem to see Dude Yin's expression as he smiled. If that's the case, then I have to congratulate you. Your wood element will have another master in the future. He might even surpass your record and become the youngest wood element master. It's a pity. If your hydraulic loom was manufactured a few days earlier, then it wouldn't have been a 4-star evaluation. It would have reached 5-star without any problem. Terence raised his eyebrows and sneered. The youngest master? Even if he were a master, he would only be at the same level as you and I. Besides, the blessings of God can sometimes be cut off at will, and the inspiration can disappear at will. Those who can really go far are people like you and I. We take one step at a time and slowly climb up. Even if we stumble along the way, we can pick up our emotions and continue again. But he is different. He has received such a special honor at such a young age. Once he stumbles, he is likely to be ruined. Ivissa, yes. I hope that he can learn to face failure. Terence slightly sneered but didn't reply. Ivissa finished the cup of tea and got up. It's getting late. I'll go back first. There is no one to supervise the little guys. They are going to be lazy again. Well, I'll send you off. Terence immediately got up, standing at the door and watching Ivis leave in the carriage. Terence slowly withdrew his gaze and said with a gloomy expression, Old fox, don't I know you have the Krulev Consortium behind you? You want to use me to test this kid? Humph. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. Dean was in the castle every day. He only trained in the morning. He didn't show up in the afternoon or evening. Even if he ate in a hurry, he would go back to the basement. Sergei was the one who felt it the most as he saw Dudin go all out. He knew how much training he had arranged. Even if the work of making inventions didn't consume physical energy, but it required brain power. Using the brain was more painful than exercising in a state of extreme fatigue. Scar and Jean had been reviewing the skills they had learned in the past few days. They wanted to ensure that they would be able to play their due level when they went outside the giant wall. In the basement, Dean's eyes were shining as he looked at the old machine that was assembled in front of him. It was a hand-cranked DC generator. Compared to modern generators, it was much simpler. Nevertheless, it took him 3 days to make the parts from the mold to the furnace. From this moment on, he had mastered the power of electricity. If I hand it over to the Temple of Elements, it should be a legendary item. There was excitement on Dean's face. Legendary items were priceless. They could be sold for millions of gold coins. Only the top consortiums had the ability to buy them. Also, there was a rule in the temple that the temple would automatically obtain the production and sales rights for the legendary items created by the temple personnel. The points of the legendary items would also be used as rewards and supplements, as well as a bunch of other benefits. All in all, it was a compulsory binding. Although the temple had to share a piece of the pie, legendary items could still be sold for millions of gold coins. Because the significance of a legendary item was to dominate a field. However, Dean restrained the impulse. At present, the Temple of Elements had just entered the research state. The lightning rod was a guiding item, but it was possible to reach the level of a 5-star item. If he directly handed over the generator, then even if it was the most old-fashioned one, it would represent an extraordinary significance. It could even cause a response from the top level of the Holy Church. With Dean's current vision and understanding, he couldn't estimate what kind of chain reaction the generator would cause. Because of this, He intended to use it for the time being. He would wait for the right time to hand it over in the future. The advancement of technology is still too slow. At present, there is no product that dabbles in steam. It seems that I have to be the first stepping stone. Dean looked at the generator. His thoughts drifted to other places. After a moment, he moved the hand-cranked DC generator to the side. He took out another drawing and prepared to build a cannon. This hand-cranked DC generator has about 100 watts of power. Even the smallest electroslag remelting furnace wouldn't be able to move it. There is no movement from the Melon Consortium. There is definitely a secret operation going on. I have to improve my strength first. Dean gave up the idea of building a modern cannon. As for the power station, it was put aside in his mind. The more quiet the Melon Consortium was, the stronger the anxiety in his heart. Only by improving his strength could he have a basic guarantee. Time flew. 8 days passed in a flash. On this day, Dean came out of the basement to eat dinner. He looked at Nicholas. "Prepare some suitcases for me and send them outside the basement." Suitcases? Nicholas was surprised. Is the invention finished? Dean nodded. It took 8 days to finally build it. Sergei and others looked at each other as they saw Dean nod. They were surprised and full of curiosity. They didn't know what the new invention would look like. After dinner, Dean took the suitcases to the basement. He put the assembly parts on the ground into it. As for the huge pedestal and the barrel, he had to use a cloth to carry them. Nicholas and others were curious as they saw the huge metal tube on the ground. They were surprised. This thing was as rough as a chimney. How could it be called an invention? After all the parts were packed, Dean looked at Scar and Jean. "Sleep early tonight. We will go outside the giant wall from tomorrow onwards." Nicholas was surprised. "Aren't you going to send your new invention to the temple for evaluation?" Dean looked at him. "Have you ever seen such a rough invention? It's a special weapon for hunting monsters. I don't know if it's good or not. Let's test the water first." Nicholas choked and couldn't say anything. Sergei was stunned. This thing is used to hunt monsters? With this tube? Gwyneth stood next to Dean and silently watched his every move. Dean almost spat out a mouthful of water when he heard Sergei's words. He thought that it was the era of cold weapons, so it was normal for Sergei to have such thinking. He said, "We will know when we use it. I don't know if it's good or not." Sergei's face was full of black lines. Do we need to use it to know? Dean looked at Sergei's speechless expression. He rolled his eyes and no longer paid attention to him. Dean dismissed everyone and went back to his room. He continued to carve with his left hand until late at night. The next day, Chapter 280. Bacon and dry food have been prepared a few days ago. 5 portions have been packed. It should be enough to last us for half a month. Nicotine replied respectfully. Dean looked at him. From a butler's point of view, Nicotine was very qualified. He basically didn't need to worry about anything. "Wake them up and gather in front of me in 5 minutes." "Yes, sir," Nicholas said, and went upstairs. Dean came to the hall and checked whether there were any missing parts of the cannons in the suitcase. Scar, Jean, Sergei, and Gwyneth went downstairs in about 3 minutes. Although Didion was rarely strict with them and his attitude was relatively mild, but they were aware of his character, so they didn't dare to cross the line. Dean looked at the 4 of them. They had changed into the intermediate hunter suit that he had bought from the Temple of Elements a few days ago. This hunting suit was an exclusive product of the Temple of Elements. It was one of the few products that the Temple of Elements sold to the public. Other consortiums were prohibited from producing and selling them. They could only be bought in the underground black market. It's the first time for both of you to go outside the giant wall. Ask Scar and Sergei if you don't understand anything. Don't leave the team. Dean said to Gwyneth and Jean. Gwyneth nodded slightly. Jean was nervous and excited. Although he used to be a Knight of Light and never went outside the giant wall, but he had chatted with Scar in the prison. He knew a lot about the things outside the giant wall. He was afraid, but also yearning for it. Eat breakfast and get ready to go, Dean ordered. Nicholas asked the maid to serve breakfast. Everyone quickly finished eating and moved the suitcase containing the cannons and the barrel wrapped in linen to the carriage outside. Duddian sat in the carriage and let Jean drive the carriage. Scar and the other two rode in front to lead the way. If anyone is looking for me, then refuse. Dean warned Nicotine, "Don't reveal my whereabouts." Nicotine respectfully complied. As he watched them leave the castle, the smile on Nicholas' face slowly disappeared, and the corners of his mouth curled into a sneer. The carriage reached a remote path. Duddian saw that there was no one around, so he asked Jean to remove the Ryan family's flag from the carriage. Then they turned around and continued to move forward. After 2 or 3 hours, they gradually left the living area and came to the wilderness near the frontier fortress. As they were driving, Dean suddenly smelled several smells coming towards them. Other consortia? Dean was puzzled. Very soon, the smell appeared in his line of sight. It was a group of soldiers in military uniforms. They galloped on their horses and quickly caught up with them. However, the latter did not seem to be coming for them. They did not slow down at all and directly passed the carriage, heading for the fortress in front of them. Dean slowly put down the curtain. His eyes flashed. It seemed that the situation in the border fortress was more tense than what was reported in the newspaper. A moment later, everyone arrived at the fort. Dean could see that the number of soldiers in the fort was several times more than before. There was an extremely dense number of soldiers patrolling in the open space behind the fort. There were also soldiers who were drilling in the open space. Some of the soldiers were around the same age as Dean. They were 15 or 16 years old. Dean saw that the movements of the young soldiers were rusty. Their limbs were weak. It was obvious that they lacked exercise. They did not look like regular young soldiers trained in the military camp. Dean frowned as he thought about the forced conscription that he had heard before. "Stop!" Scar, Sergei, and Gwyneth, who were leading the way, were stopped by a soldier. "This is the border fortress. Idlers, get out of the way." Dean opened the door and jumped out of the carriage. He took out his hunter medal and said, "We are hunters from the New World Consortium. We are here to hunt outside the giant wall." The soldier took the medal and looked at it. He looked at Sergei and others. "What about you?" Sergei snorted and took out his hunter medal from his inner armor. He threw it to the soldier. "Look carefully." His original hunter medal had been confiscated. Duddian had asked Old Feline to make a replacement for him. Any consortium could apply to the temple to make a hunter medal. The soldier looked at it to confirm that there was no mistake. He looked at Scar and others. He retracted his eyes and walked towards Dean's carriage. "Is there anyone else in the carriage?" Dean replied, "No. It's just some hunting tools." "Let me see," the soldier indifferently said. Duddian shrugged his shoulders, indicating that it was casual. The soldier opened the back of the carriage and saw several suitcases and barrels wrapped in cloth. He checked, but didn't see any suspicious items. He turned back and looked at Dean. "Are you going to use these things to hunt?" Dean faintly smiled. "Do we need to report to you how we hunt?" The soldier's face slightly changed. He turned back to the team and signaled his companions to open the gate. Dean returned to the car and passed through the passage of the fortress. Soon, he came to the outside of the towering fortress. Desolation filled his eyes. Scar and the other two continued to lead the way in the direction indicated by Duddian. After leaving the fortress, Dean lifted the curtain and saw some rough rivet hammers and knives scattered on the ground. There were some footprints and dried bloodstains on the grassy plains. It seems that there was a war here not long ago. Sergei looked around and calmly said. Gwyneth and Scar also noticed this. There was a bit of doubt in their eyes. Dean suddenly saw something. Stop the carriage. Jean quickly pulled the reins of the horse and looked back. Dean opened the door and jumped out of the carriage. He didn't pay attention to Sergei and others. He went straight to the grass a dozen meters away and picked up a knife. The knife was silver in color, and the blade was stained with blood. The handle was engraved with strange carvings. He looked at it carefully and slowly frowned. He closed his eyes and recalled for a moment. He had gone in and out of the stronghold several times, and the soldiers on duty at the stronghold were equipped with weapons. Although they had short knives, they seemed to be slightly longer and the handle was different from this one. He gently flicked the blade with his finger, producing a buzzing sound. He couldn't help but frown even more as he muttered to himself. "What's wrong?" Sergei asked in a strange tone. Dean recovered and shook his head. "Nothing." He put away the knife and returned to the carriage. "Let's continue our journey." More than 2 hours later, everyone finally saw the giant wall. It towered like a mountain and covered the sky. Dean jumped out of the carriage and saw 2 knights of light in front of the passage. He showed his hunter medal and opened the passage. Sergei and Gwyneth moved the battery into the passage. The 2 knights of light looked indifferent as they saw the things. They didn't come forward to check. They were only responsible for checking the things that were brought back from outside the giant wall. They were too lazy to care about the things that were brought out. Dean handed over the carriage and horses to the 2 knights of light. He took Sergei and others through the long passage. Sergei stopped halfway through the passage and looked at Dean. "Don't you need to pray?" Dean glanced back at him. "I said, we don't believe in God." Sergei was stunned for a moment. He looked up at the engraved image of the goddess of the hunt. Her enchanting body and beautiful face were as moving as a witch in the shadow of the light. He bowed his head and silently saluted. He closed his eyes and prayed for a moment. Then he saluted and caught up with Dean. Dean pushed open the heavy iron door and glanced around. He didn't see any monsters, so he turned over and looked at the gunpowder boxes piled up next to the giant wall. There was a tarp covering it, so it should not have been soaked by the rain. Huh. Gene stepped out of the passage and looked at the world in front of him. Was this the scenery outside the giant wall? Gwyneth was also looking at the grass and trees outside the giant wall. Dean put all the suitcases together and opened them. He took out the parts and assembled them in a few minutes. There was a 2-wheeled rolling battery under the base of the cannon. The diameter of the barrel was 20 centimeters and the length was 160 centimeters. It belonged to the small, primitive battery. Sergei, Gwyneth, and others were surprised and curious to see the strange weapon that Dean had assembled. "Isn't this a catapult?" Sergei was puzzled, "but I don't see any elastic rope." "Strange." Dean didn't answer his question. He said to the others, "Bring everything here and follow me." Sergei and others had noticed the gunpowder boxes that were piled up next to them. Sergei, who was curious, took advantage of the fact that Dean wasn't paying attention to him. He took out the powder from the edge of the box. He was puzzled when he saw the powder. "What is this poison?" Sergei asked curiously while holding the 6 explosive boxes in his arms. It was one of the more famous monsters that were below level 20. It had excellent lurking ability and amazing night vision ability. It was a killer in the dark and lake. Even senior hunters would be killed by it. Once bitten, there was no armor that could defend. Dudian remembered that according to the map that was given by the Huashan Consortium, he had stepped into the second area. However, he had encountered sized zombies and monsters below level 20. Moreover, the number was relatively small. When the senior hunters of Huashan Consortium died, they were either ambushed by monsters when they entered the third region or killed in the second region on their way back. Now 10 years have passed. The first region marked on the map had long since disappeared without a trace. Either they were hunted by each other or they had migrated. In any case, the safety factor in the first and second areas was many times higher than 10 years ago. This was good news for others, but for Dudian, it was a big pity. "Come with me." Dudian led the way to the lake about 4 miles away. He carefully sensed the movement in the surroundings. Sergei was leading the way. Sergei's steel dragon magic marks were one of the few that could withstand the sneak attack of the demon claw crocodile. Along the way, he didn't smell any monster lurking in the vicinity. After walking for about 3 miles, Dean still couldn't see the shadow of a lake in front of him. His heart felt strange. Did Huashan Consortium's map lie to him? But the year of the map didn't seem to be new. He thought for a moment and asked Scar to stop in place. Gwyneth and Jean were on standby. He called Sergei to keep up with him. He threw the gunpowder box on the ground and moved forward lightly. Dudian felt that there was a monster lurking in the grass. His muscles were tense. After all, his sense of smell wasn't a 100% detector. Soon, a large patch of short grass was exposed in front of the grass. It was a depressed basin, but the arc of the depression wasn't deep. There were aquatic weeds growing on top of it. There was a little water at the bottom of the basin. Dujian's eyes narrowed as he touched the ground with his toes. He felt that the soil of the basin was a bit soft. He took a few steps back. Was this the lake from 10 years ago? 10 years had passed, and the lake had turned into a swamp? Sergei stood on the edge and looked carefully. His face slightly changed as he took a few steps back. He looked at Dudian, moved back. Dudian was surprised as he retreated in a hurry. But he didn't see any movement in the basin. What's wrong? Sergei's eyes were dignified as he pointed to a place more than 10 meters away. Look at the bottom of the branch. Is there an eye? Dudian's heart skipped a beat as he looked at the direction of Sergei's finger. He saw a rotten branch in the water. The light couldn't reach the bottom of the branch. It was dark, but it didn't affect Dudian's vision. There was a mottled emerald ball that looked like moss growing on the ground. Dudian's eyes moved. I'll try. He bent down and picked up a piece of mud. He kneaded it into a ball and threw it towards the direction of the branch. Due to his long training as a shooter, his aim was much better. The mud ball hit the dead branch hard, and with a bang, some water splashed out. At the same time, the whole ground suddenly shook and turned 180 degrees, slowly moving into the other side of the basin. Dudian took a deep breath. He didn't expect that there would be a monster lurking in the lake. Moreover, the smell of the monster was very light. It was completely covered by the smell of the decaying water in the basin. Sure enough, Sergei looked at the figure that was twisting away. He looked at Dudian. It's a bit difficult to kill them, but they like to lurk and hunt. Once their camouflage is seen through, they will hide. They won't attack from the front unless they are too hungry. Dean's eyes flashed, so they're not particularly hungry. There are other monsters around that have become their prey, and it is likely that they live in groups. Sergei was startled as he didn't expect Dean to speculate so many things. He looked at the teenager and nodded. There is a possibility. However, it doesn't mean that the monster is weak. It is likely that it was killed by a sneak attack. There are some monster hunters that can ambush and kill monsters that are 7 or 8 levels higher than themselves. Dudian nodded. The attack weapons of the monsters were far more advanced than fur and scales. For example, the armor they were wearing was mainly used to isolate radiation and provide a small amount of protection. However, the armor would be easily torn apart by the claws of the monsters, which were around level 20. Even steel plates would be pierced. The only way to save their lives was to avoid the attack and kill the monster first. We'll hunt here. Dudian glanced around and made up his mind. Sergei was startled. Dudian turned back and looked for Gwyneth and others. There's a water source nearby. We'll set traps to hunt them. Gwyneth, your speed should be faster than us. You will be responsible for luring the monsters once the traps are set up. Gwyneth frowned as she looked at Dudian. Dudian also looked at her. Gwyneth slowly retracted her eyes, but didn't say anything. How do we set up traps? Jean was puzzled. Dudian opened the gunpowder box. Let's dig a hole and bury these. They were startled. The taciturn Gwyneth frowned and said, If I'm not mistaken, this is the powder of sulfur powder and other ores. It can only be poisoned by monsters. Why are you burying it in the ground? Dudian said, This is a weapon, not a poison. You just have to do as I say. They looked at each other. Were these powders weapons? Were the weapons buried in the ground? But they didn't say anything as they looked at Dudian's determined face. Sergei and Dudian discussed together and chose a place to dig a pit. They buried boxes of explosives in it. It didn't take long for the sky to turn dark. The traps were set up. Dudian took Sergei and others back to a place far away from the ruins. They used a few pieces of concrete to build shed. They ate dry food to conserve their strength. Jean looked at the darkness around them. He felt a bit creeped out. Will there be monsters crawling over at night? You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.